This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I'm still kind of shaking as I type this, even though it's been almost 3 months since we finally got out of that damn house for good. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive, and I can't talk to anyone about it without them thinking I'm crazy. I bought my house on Glenwood Avenue in Owasso back in 2011. It was supposed to be my forever home, you know. After my husband passed, I needed a fresh start, and the price was right. A cute little 2-story with a basement, 3 bedrooms, big backyard, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The real estate agent mentioned something about the previous owners leaving suddenly, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The weird stuff started about 3 weeks after I moved in. Nothing major at first, just little things that I could explain away, like I'd be in bed reading, almost asleep, and I'd feel what seemed like a cat walking across my bed. The weird pressure of little paws moving across the mattress. I'd sit up, turn on the light. Nothing there. I don't have pets. Never have. Then it was the blankets. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find them tugged down to my ankles. I started tucking them under the mattress before bed, thinking maybe I was just kicking them off, but it kept happening. The bathroom sink was what really started to freak me out. I'd be dead asleep at like 3 in the morning and hear water running. I'd drag myself out of bed, stumble to the bathroom, and sure enough, the faucet would be on, not just a drip. Full-on running. I checked with a plumber thinking maybe it was water pressure issues, but he couldn't find anything wrong. I probably would have kept ignoring it all if my daughter Patricia hadn't lost her apartment the following year. She needed a place to stay with her husband Butch and their blended family, 6 kids altogether. I couldn't say no, could I? They were family, but God, sometimes I wish I had. The day they moved in, things escalated. It was like whatever was in that house didn't like having so many people there. The first night, Patricia's daughters Charlotte and Sandy, who's actually her stepdaughter, were sharing the small bedroom upstairs. Around midnight, I heard screaming. I ran upstairs to find both girls huddled together on one bed, hysterical. "There's someone in the closet," Charlotte kept saying. She was only 7 at the time. Sandy, who was 12 and usually the tough one, was pale as a ghost. "We saw eyes," she whispered. "Red eyes, just watching us." Butch searched the whole closet, moved everything out, checked for animals. Anything that could explain it? Nothing. We chalked it up to imagination and the stress of moving. But the next night, same thing. And the night after that. Then we noticed the hair. Black. Long strands of hair that would appear in the walls. Not like on the walls, in them. The drywall near the staircase was crumbling a bit, old house problems, and we'd find these long black hairs poking out. When we'd pull on them, they'd keep coming like impossibly long. None of us have black hair. Patricia's is blonde. Mine is gray. The kids are all various shades of brown. These hairs were jet black and coarse. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I told myself it was to keep the kids from wandering in, but really, I was terrified of what might wander in instead. The worst incident, the one that still gives me nightmares, happened about 4 months after they moved in. Patricia was watching TV in the living room one night after everyone else had gone to bed. We had one of those couches with a pull-out bed, and she was sitting on the edge of it. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard this awful scream. I dropped everything and ran in there. Patricia was standing in the middle of the room, sobbing and grabbing at her ankle. "Something grabbed me," she kept saying. Under the couch, it grabbed my ankle and squeezed. I thought she was exaggerating until I saw the bruise forming. 4 distinct finger marks and a thumbprint, like someone had reached out from under that couch and tried to drag her under. We pulled out the bed, moved the entire couch. Nothing there, no space for anyone to hide. Little Charlotte refused to go into the kitchen after a while. She'd stand at the doorway and scream if anyone tried to make her go in. She kept talking about the big black man by the basement door. Not a person, more like a shadow, but solid. Standing there, watching. James, Patricia's 10-year-old, started seeing the red eyes too, not just in the girl's closet, but in his room, under his bed, in the hallway at night. We moved out for a while after the couch incident. Patricia and Butch found a small apartment, cramped with all those kids, but at least it felt safe. I stayed with my sister. But then Butch lost his job, and they couldn't afford the apartment anymore. Financial reality hit hard, and about 8 months later, we all ended up back at the house on Glenwood. I thought maybe whatever it was had moved on. The house had been empty. Maybe it got bored without us. I was wrong. It was worse. So much worse. The day we moved back in, I was unpacking boxes in my bedroom when the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. It was August. Outside, it was 90 degrees. Inside my room, it felt like winter. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the box I was holding. That night, all the kitchen cabinets were open when we came down for breakfast, every single one. The water in the bathroom turned on and off all day long. The kids wouldn't go upstairs alone. Patricia and I were talking about looking for another place when IT happened, the thing that made us leave for good. Patricia was in the living room again. It was around 9 at night. The kids were all upstairs, supposedly sleeping, though I could hear them whispering. Butch was working a night shift. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. I heard Patricia gasp, then silence, then this horrible scraping sound. I ran into the living room and froze. Patricia was being dragged across the floor toward the basement door. On her back, her shirt was pulled up, and there were red marks appearing on her stomach like someone was dragging their nails across her skin, but there was nobody there. She wasn't screaming. That's what freaked me out the most. Her eyes were wide with terror, but no sound was coming out, like she couldn't. I ran to her, grabbed her arms, and started pulling her back. It was like a tug of war with something I couldn't see, something strong. I was yelling for the kids to stay upstairs, screaming for help, praying to God or whoever would listen. Then suddenly, whatever had her let go. Patricia scrambled away from the basement door, gasping for air. There were perfect handprints around her ankles, dark purple bruises in the shape of fingers, and across her stomach, 5 long scratches, beading with blood. We didn't even pack. We grabbed the kids, got in our cars, and left. I had my purse, Patricia had her wallet, and that was it. Everything else we left behind. I never set foot in that house again, sent movers for our stuff weeks later in the daylight. I found out later from neighbors that nobody stays in that house for long. The people who rented it after us lasted 3 weeks. The next family, 2 months. Eventually, someone bought it and had it blessed by their church. I don't know if it helped. What makes it even weirder is that Roosevelt Park and Woods, just a few blocks away, is supposedly one of the most haunted places in Owasso. People have seen figures there, heard voices. Makes me wonder if whatever was in my house is connected to whatever's out there in those woods. I still have nightmares about those red eyes, about being dragged across the floor toward that basement door. I never did go down to the basement much. Maybe that was smart. I don't know what was in that house. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm almost asleep, I feel that weight on my bed, like something walking across it, and I have to turn on every light and check every closet before I can breathe again. I'm writing this from my new apartment 3 towns over. Sometimes I think about warning whoever lives in that house now. But what would I say? Hey, watch out for the thing with red eyes that lives in your closet. They'd think I was nuts, so I just hope they figure it out faster than I did, and that they get out before something drags them into that basement. Story 2. I still can't sleep properly, even after 3 weeks. Every time I close my eyes, I feel that same cold presence, hear that whisper, and see those things in my rearview mirror. I need to write this down. Maybe it'll help me process what happened. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. It was the second Friday of October. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Pittsburgh and decided to take the scenic route through West Virginia instead of the main highway. It was supposed to be relaxing. Beautiful autumn colors, winding roads, no traffic. I'd made this trip before in daylight, but never this late. The sun had set around 6, and by 7:30 I was deep into the mountains with nothing but my headlights cutting through the darkness. My gaslight came on as I was navigating a particularly winding stretch of road. According to my GPS, the nearest town was about 40 miles away, and I wasn't sure I had enough fuel to make it. I started to panic a little. There's no cell service in those parts, and the temperature was dropping fast. Being stranded on a mountain road in the cold wasn't an option. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out a small, dilapidated gas station with a single illuminated pump. The sign read Jim's Gas and Groceries, swinging slightly in the breeze. There weren't any other cars around, just this lonely outpost in the middle of nowhere. I remember thinking it was strange that such a remote place would still be open so late, but I was desperate, so I pulled in. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked next to the pump. The fluorescent light above it flickered, creating weird dancing shadows across the cracked concrete. The air felt unusually still, and I noticed how quiet it was. No insects, no distant traffic, nothing. Just this heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. I got out to pump the gas and immediately felt watched. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? It was like that, but worse. I scanned the darkness beyond the station's dim lights but couldn't see anything. Just trees and more darkness. The pump was ancient, the kind with the mechanical numbers that flip over instead of a digital display. It made this rhythmic clicking sound as the gasoline flowed, which somehow made the silence around me seem even more unnatural. While waiting, I decided to go inside to pay and maybe grab a coffee to help me stay alert for the rest of my drive. The store was just as run down as the outside. Yellowed linoleum floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and shelves stocked with dusty products. Some of the canned goods looked like they'd been there for years. There was this smell too, like old paper and something else I couldn't identify, something sour and wrong. Behind the counter stood this old guy, had to be in his 70s at least. Leathery skin, few teeth, wearing overalls that looked as worn as he did. He didn't greet me when I walked in, just stared with these pale blue eyes that seemed too bright for his weathered face. I grabbed a coffee from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there all day and brought it to the counter along with a candy bar. As I was taking out my wallet, the old man finally spoke. "You ain't from around here?" It wasn't a question. "No, just passing through," I replied, heading east. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "People come and go round here. Not everyone leaves, though." The way he said it made my stomach twist. It wasn't threatening exactly, more like a warning, or maybe a statement of fact. Either way, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He just shrugged and rang up my purchases. "That'll be $37.16. I handed him 2 20s, and when our fingers touched during the exchange, his skin was ice cold, like unnaturally cold. I remember thinking maybe the heating in the store was broken, but I wasn't cold. Just him. As he was counting out my change, I noticed a bulletin board behind him covered with missing person flyers, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others that looked relatively new, all different people, men, women, young, old, but all had one thing in common: last seen on this stretch of road. The old man noticed me staring and smiled. His teeth were gray and uneven. Folks get lost in these mountains. Roads can be tricky at night. I nodded, took my change, and got out of there as fast as I could without actually running. As I pushed open the door, the bell above it jangled, and I swear the sound echoed much longer than it should have. Back at my car, the pump had stopped. I replaced the nozzle and screwed my gas cap back on, all the while feeling like someone was standing just behind me. I kept turning around, but there was no one there, just darkness beyond the station's lights. As I was getting into my car, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, a figure standing at the edge of the light, near the tree line. It was tall and thin, too thin to be human, but had a human-like shape. I blinked, and it was gone. Probably just my imagination working overtime after that creepy encounter inside, right? I got in my car and locked the doors immediately. As I was starting the engine, I looked back at the store. The old man was standing at the window watching me. He raised his hand in what might have been a wave, but it looked more like a gesture of farewell, like he knew something I didn't. I pulled out of the station faster than I should have and got back on the road, pushing my car to go faster than was safe on those winding roads. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and Jim's as possible. About 15 minutes later, I started to relax a bit. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, and I was sipping my coffee, telling myself I had overreacted. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere inside my car. At first I thought it might be something caught in the ventilation system, maybe a leaf or some debris, but then it changed, becoming more deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause, like fingernails on the inside of my trunk. I turned off the radio and the scratching stopped. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear. Nothing. I turned the radio back on, and immediately the scratching resumed, louder this time. It couldn't be connected to the radio, that made no sense, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. There was no shoulder, just a steep drop-off on one side and dense forest on the other. I turned off the engine and sat there in complete darkness, listening. The scratching had stopped when I turned off the car, but now there was something else, a sound like labored breathing coming from the back seat. I froze, too terrified to turn around. In the rearview mirror, I could only see darkness, but I had this overwhelming certainty that if I turned my head, there would be someone or something sitting right behind me. Then the temperature plummeted. I'm not exaggerating. It dropped so fast that my windows fogged up instantly, and I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The cold was bone deep, the kind that makes your joints ache and your skin burn. That's when I heard the whisper, a woman's voice, right next to my ear. "Don't let them take you." I screamed and fumbled for the ignition, my frozen fingers struggling to turn the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, before roaring to life. I flipped on the headlights and threw the car into drive, tires spinning on the gravel before finding traction. As I pulled back onto the road, my headlights swept across the forest, and for just a second they illuminated dozens of pale faces watching from between the trees. Not people, not exactly. They looked human-shaped but wrong somehow, like mannequins with features that didn't quite fit together correctly. And they were moving, stepping out onto the road behind me. I floored it, taking the curves way too fast, certain that at any moment I'd lose control and go flying off the mountain. But somehow, I stayed on the road, even as my rear-view mirror showed shapes emerging from the forest and onto the road behind me, keeping pace with my car despite the fact that I was going over 60 miles an hour. The scratching started again, now coming from multiple places. The trunk, the roof, underneath the car, like something was trying to claw its way in. The whispers returned too, not just the woman now, but multiple voices overlapping, some pleading, others threatening. I couldn't make out most of the words, just fragments. Stop, help us, join, forever. I don't know how long I drove like that, blind with terror, the voices and scratching growing louder while those things followed me. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stretch and distort. Eventually, I saw lights ahead, a small town with a 24-hour gas station right at the edge. I pulled in, nearly colliding with a gas pump in my haste. The moment I entered the circle of light around the station, the scratching and whispers stopped. The temperature in my car returned to normal so quickly that sweat broke out all over my body. There was an attendant inside, a young guy probably working the night shift to pay for college. He looked alarmed when I burst in, probably because I looked like I'd seen a ghost, or worse. I was pale, sweating, shaking, and probably talking too fast as I asked him where I was and how far I'd come from the last gas station. He told me I was in Oak Ridge, about 40 miles from where I'd stopped earlier. When I mentioned Jim's gas and groceries, his expression changed. He got real quiet and asked if I was sure that's where I'd stopped. I described the place and the old man, and the attendant shook his head slowly. Jim's burned down in '98, he said. Nothing there but a concrete slab and some rusted pumps. I thought he was messing with me, but he pulled out his phone and showed me a local news article about it. Jim Harkins, the owner, had died in the fire. The place had never been rebuilt. People see it sometimes, though, the attendant continued, lowering his voice. Especially on nights with no moon, like tonight. They stop for gas, meet old Jim, and then... He trailed off. Then what? I demanded. Then they go missing, he said simply. Or they make it out like you did. The lucky ones. He told me there'd been reports for years about strange sightings on that stretch of road. Ghost cars, hitchhikers who vanish, and travelers who stop at a gas station that shouldn't exist. Some locals believe that the people who went missing at Jim's never really left, that they're still there, trapped somehow, trying to lure in new victims to join them. I spent the rest of the night in that gas station, too terrified to get back in my car until sunrise. The attendant let me stay, making fresh coffee and listening as I described everything that had happened. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded occasionally and glanced nervously out at the darkness beyond the windows. When I finally did leave after dawn, I took the main highway home, adding 2 hours to my trip just to avoid those back roads. I haven't driven at night since then. I've checked my car multiple times, had mechanics look it over, even had a priest bless it. I'm not even religious, that's how desperate I've become. But they never find anything unusual. But sometimes when I'm alone in my car, I hear that faint scratching again. And in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I think I can see faces. Not in the back seat, but somehow in the mirror itself, like they're looking through a window from somewhere else. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know if Jim's gas and groceries was some kind of ghost, or if something far worse lurks on that lonely stretch of road. All I know is that the old man was right. People come and go, but not everyone leaves, and I can't shake the feeling that even though I drove away, some part of me is still there, trapped with all the others. Story 3 dots. I've never really believed in ghosts. I mean, I've watched those paranormal shows and laughed at how fake they seemed, but I've always kept an open mind. That changed about 3 months ago when I moved into my townhouse in Mapleton. Let me start by saying I'm not some weirdo looking for attention. I'm just a normal 28-year-old who works from home as a graphic designer. I game in my free time, collect vintage military memorabilia, weird hobby I know, and generally mind my own business. But what happened that day in October still gives me chills when I think about it. I'd been living in the townhouse for about 2 months when I first noticed something was off. Nothing major at first, just small things that made me question my own memory. Keys not where I left them. The thermostat set differently than I remembered. The TV on when I was sure I'd turned it off. I brushed it off as stress or forgetfulness until the night I heard footsteps above my bedroom at 3 in the morning. My townhouse is an end unit. There shouldn't be anyone walking around upstairs because there is no upstairs above my bedroom, just the roof. After that, things escalated. I'd wake up to find cabinets open, lights on, and once, all my kitchen chairs pulled out from the table. I started getting this weird feeling in certain spots of the house, like walking through an invisible cold shower, especially by this old wooden table in my dining room that came with the place. I got desperate enough to post about it on a few forums. People suggested sage, tried it, prayer, tried it, and even getting the hell out, considered it. But I'm not in a position to break my lease. And honestly, whatever was in my house hadn't actually hurt me. It just seemed present. Through some digging into property records and talking to neighbors, I discovered my townhouse sits on what used to be military housing back in the 40s. The older lady next door told me a soldier had died in one of these homes, though she wasn't sure which one. The more I learned, the more I noticed a pattern. The activity centered around that old wooden table in my dining room. Items I left on it would be rearranged. If I put a book there, I'd find it open to a different page the next morning. A glass of water would be moved a few inches. Last Tuesday, was when everything changed. I'd had a few drinks while playing Call of Duty, ironic considering my situation, and I was feeling a bit bold. I'd recently bought these ridiculous Hello Kitty coasters from the dollar store as a joke gift for a friend, but ended up keeping them because they made me laugh. In my slightly tipsy state, I had what seemed like a brilliant idea. "Hey, Ghosty," I said out loud, feeling stupid but also a bit brave from the vodka. "I think I know who you are now. Former military, right? Well, every soldier needs a beer coaster." I grabbed the pack of Hello Kitty coasters, pink, glittery monstrosities, and bedazzled them even more with some stick-on rhinestones I had from a craft project. They were hideous, over-the-top girly, and absolutely hilarious to my buzzed brain. I arranged them neatly in front of this old ashtray on the wooden table, the spot where things seem to get moved the most. "There you go, soldier. Now your ghostly beer won't leave rings on your afterlife table." I laughed, taking a picture to show my online friends who'd been following my ghost stories. I went back upstairs to my room, hopped back in my gaming chair, and resumed my game. About 2 hours later, around 1 in the morning, I heard it. 2 distinct, firm knocks on my bedroom door, not like the house settling or the pipes making noise. These were deliberate knocks, like someone trying to get my attention. My heart nearly stopped. I lived alone. There shouldn't be anyone there to knock. I paused my game and sat frozen, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it came again. 2 knocks, firm and clear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. Nothing. I slowly got up, grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and inched toward the door. I don't know what possessed me to actually open it. Probably the same liquid courage that had me decorating coasters for a ghost earlier. But I did. The hallway was empty and dark. I flipped on the light switch and checked both the bathroom and spare bedroom. Nothing. No one. That's when a horrible thought hit me. What if the ghost didn't appreciate my joke? What if the Hello Kitty coasters had offended it? I know it sounds ridiculous now, but in that moment, I was genuinely worried I'd pissed off a military spirit with sparkly cat merchandise. I rushed downstairs to remove the coasters, nearly falling down the last few steps in my hurry. When I reached the dining room, I stopped cold. The coasters were still there, but they weren't how I'd left them. I'd arranged all 4 in a neat stack in front of the ashtray. Now, they were positioned 1 on each side of the ashtray, perfectly aligned, like they were framing it. Someone, or something, had deliberately moved them. I just stood there staring, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Had I arranged them differently than I remembered? No, I distinctly recalled stacking them. Had a draft moved them? Impossible. They'd been moved with precision, not randomly scattered. I took another picture with shaking hands and backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the table. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept my bedroom door locked and my desk chair propped under the handle, feeling both terrified and ridiculous at the same time. Morning came, and I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd had more to drink than I thought. Maybe I was subconsciously seeking patterns where there were none. I got ready for work. I had an in-person client meeting that day and went to grab my lucky charm, a set of Keegan Russ dog tags I'd bought at a military memorabilia auction. I always wore them to important meetings, but they weren't on my dresser where I always kept them. I tore apart my bedroom looking for those dog tags. They weren't expensive or anything, just replica tags from some soldier named Keegan Russ, but they were important to me. I checked under the bed, in the nightstand, in my jewelry box, even in the pockets of the clothes I'd worn the day before. Nothing. Late for my meeting and frustrated, I decided to give up the search for now. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed downstairs, and that's when I saw it. My dog tags were sitting in the center of the ashtray on the wooden table, the same ashtray that had been surrounded by the Hello Kitty coasters the night before, the same spot where things kept getting moved. I know how it sounds. I know the logical explanation is that I put them there myself and forgot. But I never ever took those tags downstairs. They stayed on my dresser or around my neck, always. I approached the table slowly, heart hammering. The dog tags were arranged deliberately, not tossed casually. They were perfectly centered in the ashtray, the chain neatly coiled around them. As I reached for them, the air around the table seemed to thicken. It was suddenly harder to breathe, like the oxygen had been replaced with something heavier, and it was cold. So cold, my breath fogged in front of my face, even though it was a warm October day and my thermostat read 72 degrees. I grabbed the tags quickly and backed away. The cold spot followed me for about 3 steps, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. I was late for my meeting, but I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed to understand what was happening. "Are you trying to communicate with me?" I asked out loud, feeling both stupid and terrified. "Did you take my tags? Are you the soldier who died here?" Silence. "Of course. I'm sorry about the Hello Kitty coasters if they offended you. I was just trying to be friendly." Still nothing, but something felt different about the silence. It felt attentive, like someone was listening. I gathered my courage and stepped back toward the table, dog tags clutched in my hand. "These mean something to you, don't they? Is your name Keegan Russ?" The lights in the dining room flickered, once, twice, 3 times. I nearly ran out of the house then, called my client, made up some emergency, and spent the day researching everything I could about the military history of Mapleton and any soldier named Keegan Russ. I found nothing conclusive, but I did learn that the land my townhouse complex sits on was once part of a training facility during World War II. Hundreds of soldiers had passed through, and yes, there had been casualties, training accidents, illness, even a suicide in one of the barracks. When I finally returned home that evening, I approached the wooden table again. This time, I placed the dog tags deliberately on its surface. "These are yours if you want them," I said, feeling a mix of fear and an odd sense of purpose. "I get it now. You're still here, and for whatever reason you noticed me. Maybe because I respect military history. Maybe because I play those war games. I don't know." I left the tags on the table and went upstairs to take a shower. When I came back down 20 minutes later, the tags were gone from the table's surface. My heart nearly stopped as I searched frantically around the room. I finally found them, hanging from my key hook by the front door, where I normally put my house keys. That's when I understood. Whatever or whoever this spirit was, it wasn't trying to scare me. It was acknowledging me, responding to me. The Hello Kitty coasters had been my attempt at communication, and moving them had been its response. Taking my dog tags and putting them in the ashtray had been its way of telling me something about its identity, and now, hanging them on my key hook was its way of returning them to me, like a roommate borrowing something and putting it back. I've been living with my military ghost for 3 months now. I still don't know for sure if it's actually Keegan Russ or some other soldier. I don't know why it stays or what it wants, but I do know we've reached an understanding of sorts. I leave one of those ridiculous Hello Kitty coasters on the wooden table every night now, like an inside joke between friends, and almost every morning I find it moved to a different spot. Sometimes I wonder if I should be afraid, but honestly, this feels less like a haunting and more like having a roommate from a different time. A roommate who doesn't pay rent, sure, but also doesn't eat my food or leave dirty dishes in the sink. Still, I'll never forget that day when I realized I wasn't alone, the day my military ghost spoke back. Story 4. I've never told this story in full before. I'm not even sure if I should be writing this down now, but after what happened yesterday, I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I've been haunted by something I call Steve for as long as I can remember. The name started as a joke when I was little. Giving this scary thing a normal name made it seem less frightening. But there's nothing normal about Steve. I grew up in a suburb called Pine Grove. Nice neighborhood, friendly people, the kind of place where kids ride bikes until streetlights come on. But inside our house, things were different. Steve isn't like those shadow figures people sometimes talk about seeing from the corner of their eye. He interacts with things. He can move objects, open doors, and worst of all, he can touch people. His hands are ice cold, like being touched by someone who's been dead for hours. And he can speak, this distorted masculine voice that sounds like it's coming through static or underwater. The most disturbing thing about Steve is his appearance. He's tall, taller than my dad, who's 6'1", and completely dark except for his eyes. They're this piercing green that seems to bleed color, like someone dropped green food coloring into water. And when he mimics me or my parents, yes, he can do that perfectly. The only way to tell it's not really us is that his eyes are always unnaturally wide open, never blinking. My earliest memory of Steve was when I was around 4. My parents called him my imaginary friend because I'd talk about the shadow man watching me from the hallway. I remember my mom laughing it off, telling relatives, kids, and their imaginations, right? But the look in her eyes told a different story. When I was 6, we had this family reunion at our house. My cousins were mean little shits who thought it was hilarious to lock me outside after dark. I remember standing in our backyard, crying and banging on the sliding glass door while they laughed from inside. That's when I felt something behind me in the darkness. The air got colder, and I had this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I turned around and saw nothing but darkness, but I knew something was there, watching. Then suddenly the door slid open, not because my cousins finally took pity on me, but because something had forced it open from the outside. The look on my cousins' faces told me they hadn't done it. They ran screaming to their parents. When I was 8, my family moved from Chile to Australia for my dad's job. I thought maybe Steve would stay behind, that whatever was happening was tied to our old house. I was wrong. The first night in our new place, I was brushing my teeth, looking in the bathroom mirror. I remember this so clearly. I was frowning because I was upset about leaving my friends behind, but my reflection was smiling back at me. Not a normal smile either, but this wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across my face. I blinked, and it was gone. That same night, I woke up around 3 in the morning and saw Steve standing in my doorway, just watching, silent. Those green eyes glowing in the darkness. As I got older, Steve's activities got more intense. He'd knock on walls, always in sets of 3. He'd open and close doors. I'd hear footsteps in empty hallways. Sometimes I'd experimentally tap on a wall, and he'd tap back the exact same pattern. Other times I'd hear this low, growling sound coming from empty rooms. My parents tried to convince me it was just the house settling or my imagination running wild, but I knew they experienced things too. I'd catch them whispering to each other, stopping mid-conversation when I walked into a room. Once, I overheard my dad asking my mom if we should call that woman again, whatever that meant. Here's the really messed up part. Steve has saved my life multiple times. When I was 13, I was going through a really dark time. Depression hit me hard, and one night I decided to end it all. I filled our bathtub, got in fully clothed, and forced myself underwater. I remember the burning in my lungs as I fought my body's natural instinct to breathe. Then suddenly, cold hands grabbed my shoulders and yanked me up out of the water with incredible strength. When I gasped and opened my eyes, I was alone in the bathroom. 2 years later, I was walking home from school, lost in thought and not paying attention. I stepped off the curb without looking, and a car was coming straight at me. I didn't even see it. Something yanked me backward so hard, I fell on my butt on the sidewalk. The car missed me by inches, horn blaring. When I looked around, there was nobody there who could have pulled me back. This pattern kept repeating. Anytime I was in genuine danger, Steve would appear. I started wondering if he was some kind of guardian, but that doesn't explain all the terrifying things he does. The worst thing about Steve is his ability to impersonate me. When I was 16, my mom came into my room to say goodnight, and I was already in bed reading. Except I wasn't. I was in the bathroom. She came running out screaming that she'd just seen me in 2 places at once. My dad thought she was having some kind of breakdown until it happened to him too, a few weeks later. He swore he'd had a 15-minute conversation with me in the kitchen while I was actually at a friend's house. He said I had been acting strange, staring without blinking. Last year, I finally got my mom to tell me the truth. Steve didn't start with me. He was in our house in Chile before I was even born. My parents had experienced things, objects moving, doors slamming, cold spots. They'd even had guests and household staff refuse to return to the house because of frightening experiences. They tried everything, priests, psychics, cleansings with sage. Nothing worked. Then I was born, and Steve seemed to shift his attention to me. I've moved 3 times as an adult. Steve always follows. I've never had a relationship last more than a few months because Steve inevitably reveals himself to anyone who stays over too often. My last boyfriend woke up to see me standing at the foot of the bed, staring at him, except I was lying right next to him. He was gone before morning, wouldn't return my calls. Yesterday is why I'm finally writing this down. I was home alone making dinner. I dropped a knife and bent down to pick it up. When I straightened up, I saw myself standing on the other side of the kitchen counter. Not a reflection. Me, or rather, Steve, looking like me. Same clothes, same hair. But those eyes, wide open, unblinking, that sickening green bleeding into the whites. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then it spoke, using my voice, but with that underlying static distortion. "I've always protected you," it said. I couldn't breathe. This was the first time Steve had directly spoken to me in years. "Why?" I managed to ask. Steve tilted his head at an unnatural angle, too far for a human neck to bend. "Because you're mine," he said. "You've always been mine." Then he smiled. My face, but not my smile. Too wide, too many teeth somehow, and vanished. I slept in my car last night. I'm writing this from a coffee shop because I can't go back to my apartment yet. I don't know what Steve meant by saying I'm his. I don't know what he wants or why he's attached to me specifically. All I know is that I'm never truly alone. Even now, I can feel him watching me. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of him in my peripheral vision or see those green eyes reflected in windows or mirrors. I've tried telling doctors, therapists. They all think it's hallucinations or some kind of mental health issue. But how do you explain hallucinations that other people see too? How do you explain being pulled from danger by something that shouldn't exist? I've researched shadow people, demons, ghosts. Nothing matches what Steve is. He's too physical to be a ghost, too protective to be a demon. Sometimes I wonder if he's something else entirely, something there isn't a name for yet. The most terrifying thought is that maybe Steve isn't haunting me. Maybe he's been preparing me for something, and after yesterday, I'm afraid that whatever it is might be starting now. If anyone has experienced anything similar or knows what Steve might be, please let me know. I'm desperate for answers. And if you've read this far, thank you. Even if you think I'm crazy, it helps knowing someone else knows about Steve now. I have to go back to my apartment eventually. I can't sleep in my car forever. But I know he'll be waiting for me. He always is. Story 5. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family because honestly, who would believe it? But after seeing similar experiences posted here, I think I'm finally ready to share what happened to me back when I was 19. I grew up in Deming, New Mexico. Not exactly a happening place, but it was home. My girlfriend Marissa lived out in the countryside with her parents, about 20 minutes from town. To get there, I had to drive down this old dirt road called Hermanus Road. It's this long stretch that cuts through nothing but desert, mesquite bushes, and a whole lot of darkness. During the day, it's just another dusty road, but at night, well, that's a different story. For the first few months of dating Marissa, my drives down Hermanus were completely normal. I'd make the trip 3 or 4 times a week, usually heading over after my shift at the auto parts store. The road was lonely but never seemed threatening, just me, my old Chevy pickup, and whatever was playing on the radio. That all changed one night in October. Marissa and I had been at a friend's place in town and were heading back to her house around 11. It was a clear night, almost no moon, which made the road darker than usual. We were about halfway down Hermanus when my headlights caught something ahead. A car pulled off to the side at a weird angle, its headlights still on but pointing into the brush. "Shit, I think someone crashed," I said, slowing down. When we pulled up, we found this Honda Civic with its front end smashed into a mesquite bush. The driver, this guy probably not much older than me, was standing next to it, looking completely shell-shocked. His face was pale, and he was shaking even though it wasn't cold. "You okay, man?" I called out as I approached him. He just kept staring at his car, then at the road, then back at his car. "I don't know what happened," he kept saying. "I don't know what happened." I checked him over for injuries while Marisa called for help on my cell. Reception was spotty out there, but sometimes you could get a signal. The guy didn't have a scratch on him, but he was freaking out. Something took control. He finally blurted out. I was just driving, and then the wheel just yanked itself out of my hands. I swear to God, man, I wasn't drunk or falling asleep or anything. It was like something grabbed the car and pulled it off the road. I chalked it up to him being disoriented from the crash. Maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was too embarrassed to admit it. A sheriff's deputy eventually showed up, and we left after giving our information. On the rest of the drive to Marissa's house, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. The way that guy looked, it wasn't just confusion or shock from an accident. It was pure fear. About 2 weeks later, I was driving down Hermanus by myself around 9 at night. I was about halfway down the road when my headlights illuminated something on the shoulder. As I got closer, I realized it was a dog, a brown and white pit bull lying on its side. I slowed down, thinking maybe it had been hit by a car and needed help. But as my lights fully hit it, I felt my stomach drop. The dog was dead, but it wasn't just lying there. It was arranged. Its legs were spread out in 4 directions, almost like it had been placed that way deliberately. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle, facing backward. I hit the brakes and just sat there, engine idling, staring at this poor animal. Something felt very wrong. It didn't look like it had been hit by a car. There was no blood I could see. It looked like it had been positioned. I didn't get out. Every instinct told me to keep driving, so I did. I called animal control the next morning to report it, and later that day, I drove back down Hermanus in the daylight to show them where it was. But the dog was gone. Not just gone, as in someone had picked it up. There was no trace it had ever been there. No fur, no disturbed dirt, nothing. The animal control guy looked at me like I was crazy or playing a prank. I started taking a different route to Marissa's after that, adding about 15 minutes to my drive. But one night in November, I was running late to pick her up for a movie, and I decided to risk Hermanus again. It was just a road, right? I'd probably imagined the whole thing with the dog, or maybe some sick person had placed it there and then removed it. It was around 8, already pitch black. I was about 3/4 of the way down Hermanus when I saw someone standing on the side of the road frantically waving their arms. My first instinct was to stop. This is the middle of nowhere, and if someone needs help, you help them. As I slowed down, I could make out more details. It looked like a man in dark clothes. He was waving his arms above his head in this desperate way, like he'd been stranded for hours. But something felt off. There was no car nearby, no sign of how this person got out here in the first place. I slowed almost to a stop about 30 feet away and rolled my window down. "You need help?" I called out. That's when the figure stopped waving. Its arms dropped to its sides in this weird mechanical way. Then it turned its head to look directly at me, and I swear to God my blood turned to ice. I couldn't make out a face in the darkness, but I could feel its stare boring into me. It wasn't the look of someone grateful for help. It was something else entirely. And then, I shit you not, it just disappeared. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. No running off into the brush, no ducking down, just there and then not there. I floored it. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't stop until I reached Marissa's house, and I was so shaken I could barely speak. I told her I'd almost hit an animal on the road, not wanting to sound crazy by telling her what I'd really seen. That night, I took the long way home and swore I'd never drive down Hermanus again, but promises are hard to keep when you're 19 and in love. About a week later, Marisa called me in tears. Her dog had run away, and she'd been looking for him all day. It was getting dark, and she was worried sick. I knew I had to go help her, and I knew the fastest way was Hermanus Road. Just this once, I told myself. One last time. It was around 7 in the evening when I started down that dirt road. I had the radio off, windows up, just focusing on getting to Marissa's as quickly as possible. I was driving faster than I should have been, probably around 50 on a road where 40 would be pushing it. I was at the spot where I'd seen the figure when it happened. My truck started to shake. Not the normal vibration you get from driving fast on a dirt road. This was violent, like something was physically rattling my vehicle. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd blown a tire, but the shaking only got worse. Then the accelerator pressed down on its own. I swear on everything I care about, my foot was hovering over the pedal, not touching it, but the truck started speeding up. 50, 60, 70 miles per hour on a dirt road in the dark. I slammed on the brakes, but it was like they weren't working. The pedal went all the way to the floor with no resistance, but the truck kept accelerating. Then the steering wheel began to turn, slowly at first, then with more force. The truck veered toward the right side of the road, toward the same spot where that Honda had crashed weeks before. I grabbed the wheel with both hands and pulled with all my strength, but it was like wrestling with something much stronger than me. My arms were shaking with effort, but the wheel kept turning. The edge of the road was coming up fast, mesquite bushes just beyond it. In desperation, I yanked the emergency brake and cut the ignition key at the same time. The truck made this horrible screeching noise as it skidded sideways, finally coming to a stop just inches from going off the road. I sat there, gasping for breath, my hands still death-gripping the steering wheel. The silence was deafening after all that noise. My truck was dead silent, headlights still cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but desert plants. For a long, horrible moment, I felt like I wasn't alone in that truck. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but I felt a presence, heavy, malevolent, watching me. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up, and my breath fogged in the air even though it wasn't that cold. Then it was gone. The feeling vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving me alone in my truck on that godforsaken road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key to restart the engine. When it finally caught, I made a U-turn and floored it back toward town. I called Marisa from a gas station and made up some excuse about my truck breaking down. I couldn't bring myself to drive down Hermanus Road again. Not that night, not ever. The next day, Marissa's dog came back on its own, muddy but otherwise fine. I never told her what really happened on that road. I never told anyone, until now. For years afterward, I'd have nightmares about that road. In my dreams, I'd see that figure again. Only this time, it would have a face. Sometimes it looked like the shocked driver from the accident, sometimes like the dead dog, sometimes like nothing human at all. I've wondered countless times if whatever tried to force me off the road that night was the same thing that caused that other driver to crash. If it was connected to the dog I found, to the figure I saw. I don't have answers, just questions that have haunted me for years. I moved away from Deming after high school, partly to get away from those memories. I haven't been down Hermanus Road in 15 years, and I never planned to go there again. But last month, my brother and I were visiting our parents in Deming. We were driving back from Las Cruces, and without warning, he took a turn I immediately recognized. My mouth went dry as I saw the familiar dirt stretching out ahead of us. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice higher than normal. "This is Hermanus Road." "Yeah, it's a shortcut," he said, not understanding. "I take it all the time." All I could do was grip the door handle and stare straight ahead as that familiar dread washed over me. 15 years later, and it came back like no time had passed at all. We made it through without incident that day, but as we drove, I couldn't help but watch the sides of the road, searching for a figure waving its arms, or a dog arranged in an unnatural pose, or signs of a crash that shouldn't have happened. Whatever is on Hermanus Road, it's still there, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I still wake up feeling like my bed is shaking, like something is trying to pull the wheel from my hands again, trying to drag me off the road into the darkness. Story 6. Have you never been the type to believe in ghosts or any paranormal crap? I'm a pretty rational person, and I usually laugh when friends start talking about their haunted apartments or whatever. But what happened at that Dunkin' Donuts in Portland completely changed my perspective, and I still can't explain any of it. I started working at this brand new Dunkin' about 8 months ago. It was one of those standalone buildings right in the middle of a shopping plaza parking lot. You know the type, just a little rectangular building with the drive-through wrapped around it. Nothing special or creepy about it. Brand new construction, bright lights, modern equipment. It was actually a pretty sweet gig compared to my last food service job. For the first month or so, everything was totally normal. I was getting along with my co-workers, learning the routine, and honestly enjoying the job. The manager was cool. The customers were mostly nice, for Portland anyway, and the tips were decent. But then weird stuff started happening. Small things at first, so small that we all just brushed them off. Items would go missing, then reappear in obvious places we'd already checked multiple times. The music would suddenly change stations when nobody was near the controls. The front door chime would go off, but no one would be there. We'd joke about it, calling it the Dunkin' Ghost, but none of us actually believed there was anything supernatural going on. We figured it was just faulty equipment in a new building still settling, but then things got weirder. I was closing one Tuesday night in February. It was around 11:30, and I was alone in the back washing dishes. Everyone else had gone home except for my shift leader, Mark, who was counting the registers up front. It was completely quiet except for the sound of running water and the clinking of dishes. That's when I heard it. Loud, aggressive banging on the back door. Not just a knock, but like someone was pounding their fist against it, hard. Then the doorknob started rattling violently, like someone was trying to force their way in. I froze. My heart started racing. The banging continued for about 30 seconds, getting more aggressive. I called out to Mark, but he couldn't hear me over the music playing at the front. When the banging finally stopped, I grabbed a knife from the clean dish rack and slowly approached the door. I'm not usually scared easily, but something about the intensity of that banging freaked me out. I waited a few seconds before quickly unlocking the door and yanking it open. There was absolutely nobody there. The thing is, our back door opens directly to the parking lot, which is completely open and well lit. There's nowhere to hide, no bushes, no cars parked nearby. Employees park on the far side. Nothing. If someone had been at that door, I would have seen them walking or running away. But there was nothing, just an empty, well-lit parking lot. I told Mark about it and he checked the security cameras. The weird part? The outdoor camera showed absolutely no one approaching the back door during that time. But the indoor camera clearly showed the doorknob rattling. Mark just shrugged it off as the wind or something, but I know what I heard. That wasn't the wind. It was deliberate banging, like someone desperately trying to get in. A couple weeks later, I was in the back again, this time cleaning the syrup pumps during a slow afternoon shift. I was completely alone back there when I clearly heard someone say, "Hey, Rissa." I jumped and looked around, but no one was there. What really freaked me out wasn't just hearing a voice when I was alone, but the fact that they called me Rissa. Nobody at work calls me that. Everyone at Dunkin' knows me as Clarissa. The only person who ever called me Rissa was my dad, who passed away 3 years ago. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just tired or stressed. But then my co-worker Jamie experienced something similar. We were both working the morning rush when Jamie suddenly looked confused and walked over to the drive-through window looking outside. "Was that Melissa?" she asked me, referring to our co-worker. "No, Melissa's not working today," I replied. Jamie looked really confused. I swear I just heard her talking about needing more cups by the coffee station. We both looked at each other, and I got goosebumps. Jamie and I had both heard voices of people who weren't there. Things escalated from there. About a week later, Jamie was helping a customer at the front counter when she suddenly went pale and stepped back. The customer looked confused as Jamie's eyes filled with tears. After the customer left, Jamie told me that while she was taking the order, she heard her deceased grandmother's voice speaking directly into her ear, clear as day, saying, "I'm still watching over you, sweetheart." Jamie was shaking as she told me this. Her grandmother had passed away just 6 months earlier, and they'd been extremely close. The phrase, "I'm still watching over you, sweetheart," was exactly what her grandmother would say to her as a child whenever Jamie was scared or worried. Jamie had to take her break early that day because she was so shaken up. By this point, several of us were convinced something weird was happening in our store. A few employees refused to work closing shifts alone, and honestly, I didn't blame them. But I needed the money and the hours, so I kept taking the late shifts. The worst incident happened about a month ago. I was closing with my coworker Tyler. It was just after midnight, and we'd locked the front doors. I'd finished putting all the chairs upside down on the tables in the dining area, which is something we do every night to make it easier for the morning crew to mop. Tyler and I were in the back, finishing up the closing duties when we both clearly heard the door chime, the electronic sound that plays whenever someone enters the store. We looked at each other in confusion. "Did you lock the front door?" Tyler asked me. "Yeah, I'm positive," I said, but I was already heading to the front to check. The doors were still locked. There was nobody in the dining area. Tyler checked the security footage later, and it showed the doors remaining closed, but the camera clearly picked up the sound of the door chime. We were both on edge after that, rushing to finish our closing duties so we could get out of there. That's when we heard a loud crash from the dining area. We both ran out to find one of the chairs had fallen off a table and was lying on its side on the floor. "Maybe you didn't put it on properly," Tyler suggested. But I knew I had. I'd been doing this job for months. I know how to put a chair on a table. Still, to be safe, I decided to take all the chairs down. There were only about 12 tables, so it didn't take long. I placed all the chairs neatly around each table, making sure they were stable and properly positioned. Tyler and I went back to finish the last few closing tasks. We were both silent, listening intently for any more sounds. That's when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a chair being pulled out from a table. That specific scraping noise of metal chair legs against the tile floor. I felt my blood run cold. Tyler and I looked at each other, and I could tell he was as terrified as I was. We slowly walked back to the dining area, and there it was, one chair, pulled about 3 feet away from its table, the exact same chair that had fallen earlier. I'm not ashamed to admit that we both completely freaked out. We left the rest of the closing duties unfinished, shut off the lights, set the alarm, and got the hell out of there. I remember my hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock the door. The next day, our manager was upset that we'd left without finishing everything. But when we explained what happened, she got really quiet. Turns out we weren't the first ones to experience something like this. She admitted that several other employees had reported strange occurrences, but she'd kept it quiet to avoid scaring everyone. What makes this whole thing even weirder is that the building is brand new. It's not like it's some ancient building with history. It was built less than a year ago on what used to be just an empty section of the parking lot. There's no tragic backstory, no reason for it to be haunted. I still work there, but I refuse to close anymore. I've switched to morning shifts only. A few employees have quit, and whenever new people ask why, we just make up excuses about the hours or the pay. Nobody wants to be the person who says, "Oh, by the way, this place is haunted." I've tried researching the location, thinking maybe something happened on that land before the plaza was built, but I haven't found anything significant. No accidents, no murders, nothing that would explain what's happening. The strangest thing to me is still that voice calling me Rissa. It sounded exactly like my dad. Same tone, same inflection. Sometimes I wonder if he's trying to reach out to me, or if something else is mimicking his voice to lure me in. I don't know what to make of any of this. I'm not religious or spiritual, and I've always been skeptical about paranormal stuff. But I know what I experienced, what we all experienced. There's something not right about that Dunkin' Donuts, and I don't think any of us will ever be able to explain it. The chair incident was the final straw for me. I can rationalize a lot of things: weird sounds in a new building, imagination playing tricks. Even the door chime could possibly be explained by an electrical glitch. But a chair physically moving across the floor when nobody is there, I can't explain that, and honestly, I don't want to try. Story 7. I need to get this off my chest. It's been 3 days and I still haven't slept properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Or what I think I saw, I don't even know anymore. Last weekend, my buddy Max and I decided to do some bushcraft camping in the woods outside Blackwater Ridge. We've been friends since elementary school and used to camp all the time as teenagers, but adulting got in the way and we hadn't done it in years. We've both been watching those survival shows lately and thought it would be cool to try our hand at building shelters from scratch instead of bringing tents. We picked a spot about 2 miles in from the main trail, secluded enough to feel like we were really roughing it, but not so far that we couldn't hike out if something went wrong. The location seemed perfect when we found it, a small clearing surrounded by young pine trees that formed a natural barrier. It was still early afternoon, maybe around 3 o'clock, so we had plenty of daylight left to set up camp. The first thing that struck me as odd was how quiet it was. I mean, forests are supposed to be peaceful, but this was different. There were no birds chirping, no squirrels rustling through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to die down as soon as we entered that clearing. I mentioned it to Max, but he just shrugged it off, saying the wildlife probably heard us coming and scattered. We started setting up right away. Max began unpacking our cooking gear to set up a makeshift stove, while I went to cut down a small tree for our shelter frame. The plan was to build a lean-to with a small fire in front to keep us warm through the night. I was about 50 feet from our campsite, sawing away at a skinny pine with my camping hatchet when I first felt it. Despite working up a sweat from the physical effort, I suddenly felt this bone-deep chill, like someone had replaced my blood with ice water. I stopped cutting and stood up straight, thinking maybe I was coming down with something. That's when I realized how unnaturally quiet it still was. Not just quiet, silent, like the forest was holding its breath. I couldn't even hear Max moving around at our camp, though he was just behind the line of trees. I was about to call out to him when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. There was a small gravel path about 20 meters to my right, probably an old logging trail. Something dark was moving along it, staying close to the tree line on the opposite side. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe even a black bear, but as I watched, I realized it wasn't moving right. It had 4 limbs, but they didn't move like an animal's legs. They moved more like human arms and legs, but in a way that was just wrong. The proportions were off, and the gait was jerky, like a broken marionette. I stood completely still, my hatchet hanging useless at my side. The thing moved into a clearing where the sun was shining through the canopy, and I should have been able to see it clearly, but instead, it seemed to dissolve. 1 second it was there, a dark shape moving against the trees, and the next it was gone, like ink dispersing in water. What freaked me out the most was that it made absolutely no sound. Nothing. No crunching of gravel, no snapping of twigs. Whatever it was, it looked heavy enough to make noise moving across that path, but there was nothing. Just that suffocating silence. I whispered Max's name, afraid to raise my voice. He must have heard the fear in my tone because he appeared at the edge of our campsite within seconds, a questioning look on his face. I didn't explain, just motioned frantically for him to get back to camp. "We need to leave, now," I said when I reached him, keeping my voice low. To his credit, Max didn't argue. Maybe he felt it too, that wrongness in the air. We packed up our stuff in record time, barely speaking, just exchanging glances that said everything we needed to know. Something wasn't right, and neither of us wanted to stick around to find out what. As we hiked away from that spot, the forest gradually came alive again. First, We heard the wind in the trees, then birds started singing in the distance. The oppressive chill lifted from my shoulders with each step we took, and by the time we reached the main trail, things almost felt normal again. In the car, Max finally asked what I'd seen. I tried to explain, but the words sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth. A shadow that moved like a human but wasn't, that disappeared into thin air. He suggested it might have been a moose or something, and I latched onto that explanation, desperate for a rational answer. Yeah, probably just a moose, I agreed, though neither of us believed it. We drove home mostly in silence, both lost in our thoughts. When he dropped me off, Max made some joke about watching too many horror movies, and we laughed it off like it was nothing, like we hadn't just fled the woods in terror from something we couldn't explain. But here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it, about the silence, about how everything living in that part of the forest seemed to be hiding, holding its breath, about how that thing moved. It wasn't natural. Nothing about it was natural. I've been Googling local folklore, trying to find something that matches what I saw, but there's nothing specific, just the usual campfire stories about wendigos and skinwalkers that every forest town has. But those are just stories, right? Last night I called Max to see if he was handling it better than me. He wasn't. He admitted he'd felt something wrong the moment we entered that clearing, but didn't want to seem paranoid. He said he kept feeling like we were being watched the whole time we were setting up camp. And when I called him over, right before we left, he said he'd just seen something dark moving between the trees on the opposite side of our campsite, headed in our direction. We never told each other what we saw until that phone call, and we both described the same thing. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear walking on injured legs. Maybe it was shadows playing tricks on our eyes. Maybe we breathed in some weird fungus spores that made us hallucinate the same thing. But I can't shake the feeling that what we encountered was something else entirely, something that doesn't belong in our understanding of the world. The part that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, it's what I felt, that absolute stillness, the way everything living seemed to vanish from that part of the forest, like nature itself was hiding from whatever was moving through those trees. I keep thinking about how quickly the forest returned to normal as we left, like we had walked out of a bubble of wrongness and back into the real world. But that means the bubble is still there, waiting in those woods. I've always been a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or any of that supernatural crap. But I know what I saw and I know what I felt. And both Max and I experienced the same thing without comparing notes until days later. I haven't told anyone else about this. Who would believe me? Hey, I saw a weird shadow in the woods, and now I'm freaking out. They'd laugh me out of the room. But I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet who might understand. I'm writing this at 4 a.m. because I woke up from a nightmare where I was back in those woods, alone this time. In the dream, I heard something moving behind me, getting closer with each passing second. But when I turned around, there was nothing there, just emptiness and silence. Then I realized the silence was moving toward me, swallowing everything in its path. I woke up gasping for air, convinced for a split second that the silence had followed me home. I know how crazy this all sounds. Trust me, I do. If someone told me this story a week ago, I'd think they were making it up or had an overactive imagination. But I know what I experienced. Max and I have already decided we're never going back to that spot. We're not even sure we want to go camping again, period. Some things you can't unsee, can't unfeel. The most terrifying part is that whatever that thing was, it was aware of us. I'm certain of it. It wasn't just some animal passing through. It was patrolling, hunting, and for whatever reason it let us leave. I keep wondering if we had stayed just a little longer, would we have ended up like everything else in that forest? Silent, gone, just another empty space in the woods. If anyone has experienced something similar or knows what this might have been, please let me know. I need answers. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. And if you go camping near Blackwater Ridge, stay on the main trails. Don't venture into the deep woods. And if you find yourself in a place where the birds stop singing and the air grows cold despite the sun, run. Don't look back. Just run. Story 8. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. I grew up pretty skeptical about that kind of stuff. Science and logic were always my go-to explanations for weird occurrences. But what happened to me back in 2018 completely changed my perspective, and even now, 5 years later, I still can't explain it. So I was dating this girl, Sophia, at the time. Super sweet, kinda quirky, with this infectious laugh that could light up a room. She lived with her mom in this log cabin about 2 hours north of my hometown. It was pretty isolated, surrounded by these tall pine trees and set back from the main road. The kind of place that looks cozy during the day, but gets eerily quiet at night. The first time I visited, Sophia casually mentioned that her house was haunted. I remember laughing it off, thinking she was just trying to mess with me, but she wasn't smiling when she said it. She told me that she often heard footsteps in the living room above her basement bedroom at night, even when her mom was working night shifts at the hospital. What really freaked me out was when she said these entities would respond to questions with knocking sounds. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no, that kind of thing. I didn't really take it seriously. I figured old houses make noises, floors creak, pipes knock. There's always a logical explanation, right? But I was about to find out how wrong I was. It was during my 3rd visit when things got weird. We'd had a pretty normal day, hiked around the property, watched some movies, made dinner together. Nothing unusual. We went to bed around 11 in Sophia's basement bedroom. It was nice down there, cooler than the rest of the house, with this comfy, queen-sized bed and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. The only thing I didn't like was the open staircase that led upstairs. There wasn't a door at the top, just this dark opening that seemed to swallow all the light. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. At first, I couldn't figure out what had disturbed me. The room was dark except for this faint blue light from Sophia's phone charger. She was sound asleep next to me, breathing deeply. I remember feeling suddenly alert, like when you sense someone watching you. That's when I looked toward the stairway and saw it, a black silhouette of a man peering around the corner, not just a shadow or a trick of the light. This was a solid 3-dimensional figure, darker than the darkness surrounding it. It was just standing there, half of its body hidden behind the wall, with its head tilted slightly as if it was studying me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. It felt like my heart stopped beating for a moment. We just stared at each other, me and this thing. It didn't move like a normal person would. It was completely still, unnaturally still, like it wasn't even breathing, and I couldn't make out any features. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just this pitch-black outline of a man. This standoff lasted for what felt like forever, but was probably only about a minute. Then slowly, God, so slowly, it began to retreat. It didn't turn away or walk off. It just receded back around the corner, sliding away until it disappeared completely. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at that staircase, too terrified to move. I kept expecting it to come back, maybe even come down the stairs this time. But nothing happened. Eventually, the sun started to rise, and that blue-gray morning light filled the basement. Only then did I finally relax enough to doze off for maybe 30 minutes. When I woke up again, Sophia was already up and making coffee upstairs. I was exhausted and shaken, but I went up and immediately told her what I'd seen. I expected her to be freaked out or at least surprised, but she just nodded like I'd told her it was going to rain today. "Yeah, that happens sometimes," she said, handing me a mug of coffee. "Whatever haunts this house never comes downstairs though, so you're safe in my room." Safe? I didn't feel safe at all. How could she be so casual about a shadow person watching us sleep? But she'd grown up with these experiences, so I guess to her it was just another quirk of the house, like a sticky door or creaky floorboard. Throughout the day, things got even weirder. We were sitting in the kitchen having lunch, just some sandwiches and chips, when I started noticing something in my peripheral vision. Every time I'd turn my head to look at the hallway or the living room, I'd catch a glimpse of a dark figure, like someone quickly moving out of sight. It wasn't as distinct as what I'd seen the night before, more like a blur of movement, but it was definitely there. I tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. I'd be mid-sentence talking to Sophia, and then I'd see it again. This black silhouette just at the edge of my vision. When I'd turn to look directly at it, there would be nothing there. After the fifth or sixth time, I was getting seriously freaked out. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled my drink. Sophia noticed and asked if I was okay. When I told her what was happening, she called her mom into the kitchen. Her mom was this short, tough-looking woman with graying hair and sharp eyes. She sat down across from me and spoke with this slight accent I couldn't quite place. "We have 2 domovoi attached to the house," she said matter-of-factly, like she was telling me about their pets. She explained that domovoi were protective spirits from Russian folklore, household guardians that watched over the family. "They're curious about you because you're new." Then she told me this story that made my blood run cold. A few years back, when she and Sophia's dad were separated but not yet divorced, he had come to the house to pick up some of his belongings while they were away for the weekend. He called her in a complete panic, yelling about 2 creatures that were following him around the house. He described them as shadow people, exactly like what I had seen. He was so terrified that he left without taking anything and refused to ever enter the house again. "They don't like men in the house," Sophia's mom said with a shrug, "but they won't hurt you as long as you're respectful." I didn't find that particularly reassuring. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every room I entered felt occupied already, even when it was empty. The air seemed heavier somehow, charged with something I couldn't explain. I kept seeing those movements, those dark shapes, just out of focus. By evening, I was completely on edge, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. That night, I convinced Sophia to stay at a motel in town. I made up some excuse about wanting to take her out for a nice dinner and it being too late to drive back, but the truth was I couldn't face another night in that house. She seemed to understand without me having to explain. The weird thing is, after we left the property, all those feelings vanished. No more shadows in my peripheral vision, no more sense of being watched. It was like crossing some invisible boundary had broken whatever connection those things had to me. I figured that was the end of it. I broke up with Sophia a few months later for completely unrelated reasons and tried to put the whole experience behind me. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, or maybe some kind of weird stress reaction. Maybe there was something in the house that had triggered a hallucination, mold or carbon monoxide or something. But then, 2 years later, it happened again. I was dating this girl named Rachel, who lived in a different town about an hour away from my place. She had this cool old Victorian house that her parents had bought and renovated. The attic had been converted into this awesome living space with slanted ceilings and these circular windows that let in the perfect amount of light. It was her personal area, kind of like an apartment within the house. One night, we were hanging out up there just talking and listening to music. Somehow the conversation turned to whether the house was haunted, and Rachel started telling me about its history. Apparently, several people had died in the house over the years. One previous owner had even hanged themselves in that very attic back in the 1970s. The moment she said that, I felt this weird shift in the air, like the pressure had suddenly changed. It got colder too, even though it was the middle of summer and the AC wasn't running. I remember rubbing my arms trying to get rid of the goosebumps that had appeared. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the attic, about 4 meters away, was the silhouette of a woman in a dress. Unlike the figures at Sophia's house, this one wasn't just a black shape. I could make out angry eyes staring directly at me, these pale, glowing points in an otherwise featureless face. She was pressed against the wall, not moving, just watching. I stopped mid-sentence and pointed. Rachel followed my gaze and immediately went pale. She saw it too. For a few seconds, we both just sat there, frozen in terror. Then Rachel scrambled for her phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the corner. There was nothing there, just an empty corner with some boxes and an old bookshelf. But the air still felt wrong, heavy and thick, like it was pressing down on us. I felt something cold brush against my shoulders and the back of my neck, like icy fingers lightly touching my skin. We bolted downstairs so fast I nearly fell. Rachel was in tears, shaking uncontrollably. She told me that she'd felt things in the attic before, cold spots, items moving around, but had never actually seen anything. Her parents didn't believe in ghosts and had dismissed her concerns as an overactive imagination. That night, Rachel insisted on burning sage throughout the house, focusing especially on the attic. She'd learned about cleansing rituals from her aunt, who was into that kind of thing. I was skeptical but willing to try anything at that point. Strangely enough, it seemed to work. The heavy feeling disappeared, and neither of us saw the woman in the corner again. But I never felt completely comfortable in that attic afterward. There was always this lingering sense that we weren't alone, that something was just waiting for us to let our guard down. To this day, I can't explain what I saw in those houses. I've done research, read about shadow people and residual hauntings and all kinds of paranormal phenomena. None of it quite fits what I experienced. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was all in my head, stress, suggestion, and overactive imagination. But then I remember the absolute terror I felt, the undeniable presence of something other. I haven't had any similar experiences since then, but I'm always a bit hesitant when visiting someone's home for the first time. I find myself scanning the corners, checking my peripheral vision, feeling out the energy of a place, because now I know that sometimes the shadows are watching back. Story 9. I don't usually share this story because it sounds so trivial when I say it out loud, but it genuinely shook me to my core. Even now, 8 years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was Halloween weekend, 2015. I'd traveled to Portland to visit my college buddy Mark, who'd moved there for work about 6 months earlier. He'd bought this older house in one of those neighborhoods with huge trees lining the streets. You know, the kind that look amazing in fall but are probably a nightmare to rake leaves from. The house itself was built in the 1950s, all wooden floors that announced your every step and those classic features you don't find in newer construction. It had this weird charm to it, but also that slightly unsettling feeling you get in older homes, where you can't help but wonder about everyone who lived there before. One of the house's quirks was this laundry chute in the upstairs bathroom. It was built into the wall next to the toilet. Basically a metal-lined shaft that dropped straight down to a basket in the basement laundry room. Pretty convenient feature, honestly, but also kind of creepy when you think about it. Just this dark hole leading down into the basement. That Saturday, we had tickets to the Trailblazers game. It was a Halloween-themed night at the arena, and Mark had convinced me we should do some basic face paint to get into the spirit. Nothing elaborate, just some black and red team colors. I'm not usually into that kind of thing, but what the hell, right? It was Halloween weekend. So there I was, around 6 in the evening, standing in Mark's upstairs bathroom getting ready. The bathroom had that vintage vibe. Black and white tile floor, a pedestal sink, and this old medicine cabinet mirror that was slightly warped, so your reflection looked just a little off. I had my eyeliner pencil, borrowed from Mark's girlfriend, and was carefully drawing some black designs around my eyes. The bathroom window was closed, no fans were running, the house was quiet except for the NBA pre-game show Mark was watching downstairs. I remember these details specifically because of what happened next. I was leaning toward the mirror, focusing intently on not messing up the line I was drawing, when something changed in the room. It's hard to describe, but the air suddenly felt different, like that stillness right before a storm hits. I got this intense feeling of butterflies in my stomach, the kind you get when you're at the top of a roller coaster about to drop. I froze, eyeliner pencil still pressed against my skin. That's when I noticed the toilet paper. Mark had one of those multi-packs of toilet paper stacked on a small shelf above the toilet. The top roll suddenly tipped forward as if someone had nudged it. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, but instead of just sitting there, it started unraveling. Not just a little bit, the roll began spinning rapidly, toilet paper streaming out across the bathroom floor. At first, I thought it must have landed at an angle that caused it to roll, but then something even stranger happened. The toilet paper started moving purposefully toward the laundry chute. It was like watching one of those cartoon scenes where a character leaves a trail behind them, except there was no one pulling it. The paper just moved by itself. I stood completely still, eyeliner forgotten, as the toilet paper streamed across the floor and began disappearing down the chute. It wasn't being yanked or pulled. It was flowing, almost like water, down into the darkness. The roll kept spinning faster than it should have been able to on its own, until the entire roll had unraveled. Then the cardboard tube itself rolled in small circles before coming to a stop right at the edge of the laundry chute. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was absolutely no logical explanation for what I'd just witnessed. No draft strong enough to move toilet paper that deliberately. No slope in the floor that would cause it to roll in that specific direction. Nothing. Just as I was contemplating whether I was losing my mind, there was a knock at the bathroom door that nearly made me jump out of my skin. "Jordan, you almost done in there? We should leave in like 20 minutes. It was Mark. I opened the door and I must have looked as shaken as I felt because Mark immediately asked, "Dude, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to explain what had happened, pointing to the empty cardboard tube still sitting by the laundry chute. The toilet paper, it unraveled by itself and went down the chute. Mark looked at me skeptically, probably assuming I was trying to prank him since it was Halloween weekend. But then his expression changed. "Wait," he said, suddenly serious. "I was just down in the basement grabbing a clean jersey from the dryer, and I saw toilet paper coming down the chute. I figured you dropped it by accident." My blood ran cold. "You saw it? What did it look like?" Mark's face had that same unsettled look. I'm sure mine did. That's the weird thing. It wasn't just falling down in a clump like you'd expect. It was folding, like making these perfect zigzag patterns as it came down. I was actually coming up to ask if you were doing some kind of craft project or something. We stood there, both trying to process what had happened. I hadn't touched the toilet paper. Mark hadn't touched it. Yet somehow, an entire roll had unraveled itself, traveled across the bathroom floor, gone down the chute, and folded itself into neat patterns as it fell. "Maybe there's someone in the house," I suggested. Though I knew we were alone. We'd been there all day, doors locked, security system on. We did a quick search of the house anyway, checking closets and under beds like scared kids, but found nothing. No open windows, no signs of entry, just an empty cardboard tube by the laundry chute and a pile of zigzag folded toilet paper in the basement. We tried to laugh it off as we headed to the game. "The toilet paper ghost," Mark called it, trying to make light of the situation. Of all the ways a ghost could haunt a place, it chooses to TP the house from the inside. Real mature spirit. But his laughter sounded hollow, and I noticed he kept checking his phone for the time, eager to be out of the house just as much as I was. The basketball game was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything but replaying the incident in my mind, looking for some explanation I might have missed. A draft, a vibration in the house, some elaborate prank Mark had set up. None of it made sense. When we got back to the house later that night, we were both hesitant to go inside. Nothing else strange happened that weekend, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, especially in that bathroom. I kept the door open when I used it and didn't take any more time than absolutely necessary in there. Sunday night, as I was packing to head home, Mark finally brought it up again. "You know what's really freaking me out about the toilet paper thing?" he said, sitting on the edge of his bed while I stuffed clothes into my duffel bag. "What?" "It's such a stupid thing, like, if you're going to have a supernatural experience, shouldn't it be more significant? A ghostly figure, objects flying across the room, scary voices, not toilet paper unrolling itself." He was right. That was part of what made it so unsettling. It was such a mundane, almost silly occurrence, but the deliberateness of it, the way it moved with purpose, the way it folded itself on the way down, suggested an intelligence behind it that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just trying to get our attention, I suggested. Or maybe it was its idea of a Halloween prank, TPing the house. But from the inside. Mark didn't laugh. I've been in this house for 6 months and nothing weird has ever happened. Then you visit on Halloween weekend, and suddenly we've got toilet paper with a mind of its own. I didn't know what to say to that. Was he implying I had somehow brought something with me, or that I was responsible? I knew I wasn't, but I also knew how ridiculous the whole thing sounded. Before I left the next morning, I used that bathroom one last time. Standing there, I found myself speaking out loud to the empty room. "That was a good one," I said, feeling slightly ridiculous. "You got us. Happy Halloween." As I turned to leave, the bathroom light flickered once, briefly, probably just a coincidence. At least that's what I told myself as I practically ran down the stairs. I've been back to visit Mark several times since then. Nothing strange has ever happened again. The toilet paper stays where it's supposed to. The house creaks and settles like any old house does. Life goes on, but sometimes when I'm alone in my own bathroom, I'll catch myself glancing nervously at the toilet paper roll, half expecting it to move, and every Halloween, Mark sends me a text with just a toilet paper emoji. We laugh about it now, the toilet paper ghost that decided to prank us that Halloween weekend, but underneath the laughter is that lingering question. What really happened in that bathroom? What force or presence decided to put on its own little Halloween show? I still don't have an explanation, and honestly, I'm not sure I want one. Story 10. I've been wanting to share this for months now, but every time I start typing it out, I delete everything because it brings back all the fear. I guess I need to get this off my chest, though. This happened last summer when I was 16. I've always been into urban exploration, checking out abandoned buildings and places with creepy histories. There's something about walking where others once lived their lives that gives me this weird rush. My parents think it's stupid and dangerous, but whatever. I live in a small town in South Dakota where literally nothing happens, so I have to make my own fun. Last July, I was researching cool abandoned places within driving distance, and I came across Woodman's Circle in Sherman, Texas. It was this old orphanage and retirement home for widows that had been abandoned since the 70s. The pictures online were insane. Crumbling walls, graffiti everywhere, creepy hallways. I read that it used to house widows and their orphaned children. Perfect urbex material. I convinced my parents I was staying at my friend Matt's house for the weekend, but instead I took my dad's old Honda and made the drive. It was about 8 hours, but I had my playlist ready and snacks packed. I arrived in Sherman around 11 at night and found a motel to crash at. I planned to hit Woodman's Circle the next night, so Saturday night rolls around, and I'm feeling that mix of excitement and nervousness. I waited until it was dark, around 9:30. I didn't park directly at the property because I'd read online that cops sometimes patrolled the area. I found a spot about a mile away behind this closed gas station and walked the rest. It was warm that night, probably mid-80s, even though the sun had been down for hours. I had my backpack with a flashlight, water bottle, and my phone. I smoked a cigarette as I walked. Yeah, I know, bad habit, and had Pink Floyd playing through my earbuds. Comfortably Numb seemed like the perfect soundtrack for what I was about to do. When I got to the property, I could see the buildings looming against the night sky. The place was bigger than I expected. There was a main building with this big porch and several smaller buildings surrounding it. A barbed wire fence circled the property, but it was old and sagging in places. I found a spot where I could slip under without getting caught on the wire. The main building had this eerie vibe. Tall windows, peeling paint, the whole abandoned building aesthetic. I took a few pictures on my phone and headed for the front door. It was this massive wooden door that looked like it belonged in a haunted mansion. I tried pushing it open, but it wouldn't budge. It seemed stuck or locked from the inside. I wasn't about to give up that easily, so I decided to check out one of the side buildings first. The door there was partially open, hanging off its hinges. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me, that musty, damp smell of a place that's been empty for decades. I turned on my flashlight and saw I was in some kind of long hallway with doors on both sides. The floor was covered in debris, pieces of ceiling, broken glass, old papers. I started checking the rooms. Most of them were small, probably bedrooms. There were rusty bed springs still attached to metal frames, old toilets and bathtubs in what must have been bathrooms. In one room I found a pile of old clothes, like dresses and children's shirts. They were rotting and covered in dust, but it was still weird to see such personal items left behind. After exploring that building for about an hour, I decided to try the main building again. I went around to the back and found another entrance. Weirdly, when I pushed this door, it opened easily. I stepped into what must have been a common area. There were broken chairs scattered around and graffiti on the walls, most of it typical stuff like names and crude drawings. In the corner of this room, there was this square opening in the wall, a dumbwaiter shaft, I realized. I shined my flashlight up it and saw it went up at least 2 floors. What freaked me out was that there seemed to be some fabric caught in the mechanism at the bottom. It looked like children's clothes, like a small sock or something. I took a picture because it was creepy as hell. That's when I heard it. Voices. They were muffled, like people talking in hushed tones. At first, I thought it might be other urban explorers, which would have been a relief, honestly. The voices seemed to be coming from deeper in the building, so I followed the sound, trying to move quietly. The hallway I entered had several rooms branching off it. The voices got clearer as I moved forward, but I still couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like a conversation, maybe 2 or 3 people talking. I was trying to figure out which room they were coming from, when suddenly I heard someone say, "Shh," very sharply. Everything went quiet. I mean, dead silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stood there frozen for maybe 20 seconds, not even breathing. Then, like an idiot, I called out, "Hey, I'm just exploring. I can leave if I'm bothering you guys." Nothing. No response. I waited another minute, then decided to check the room where I thought the voices had been coming from. I pushed the door open slowly and shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Completely empty, except for some trash in the corner. No people, no other exits except a closet that was open and also empty. That's when I started to panic. I thought maybe the voices had come from above, so I pointed my flashlight at the ceiling. There was a hole in it, about 2 feet across, where the plaster had fallen through. As I was looking up at that hole, trying to make sense of where the voices could have gone, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Someone, or something, was sticking their head down through that hole, looking right at me. But the face, the face was wrong. It was smiling, but the smile was too wide, stretching across their face unnaturally, and the eyes were small and spaced too far apart. In the flashlight beam, they looked glossy, like doll's eyes. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a little kid. Then I turned and ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just needed to get out. I fumbled with my phone to turn on the flashlight app because my other flashlight had dropped when I screamed. I sprinted down the hallway, back through the common room, and out the door I'd come in. I didn't stop running until I reached the barbed wire fence. As I was crawling under it, I looked back at the main building. There were 3 figures standing on the porch now, just standing there watching me. And then one of them, I swear to God, mimicked my scream. It was exactly the same pitch and tone, like a recording being played back. I don't remember much about the mile run back to my car. I know I did it in like 7 minutes, which is insane because I'm not athletic at all. My lungs were burning and I had scratches all over my arms from bushes I'd run through, but I didn't feel any of it until I was in my car with the doors locked. I started the engine and got the hell out of there, driving straight back to South Dakota. I didn't even stop at the motel to get my stuff. I just wanted to be home, to be somewhere familiar and safe. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe they were homeless people living in the building, or other teens playing a prank. But those eyes and that smile, they weren't right. And how did they move from the room to the porch so quickly without me seeing them? How did they mimic my screams so perfectly? I've looked online for similar experiences at Woodman's Circle, but I haven't found anything specific about what I saw. I deleted most of the pictures I took that night because I couldn't stand looking at them, but I kept one of the outside of the building. Sometimes I stare at it, trying to see if there's anyone in the windows. I haven't gone urban exploring since then. My parents' garage freaks me out now if I'm alone in it at night. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I think I hear someone say, "shh," right next to my ear, and I have to turn on all the lights. I don't know what was in that building. I don't know if they were people or something else. All I know is that I'm never going back to Woodman's Circle, and I'm never exploring abandoned buildings again. Some places should stay abandoned, and whatever lives in them should be left alone. Story 11. I'm still shaking as I type this. It's been 3 days since it happened, and I can't stop thinking about it. I've barely slept. Every noise makes me jump. But I need to share this because I still can't believe what happened, and I don't think I'll ever look at dogs the same way again. I graduated college last spring with a mountain of student debt and no job prospects in my field. After sending out what felt like hundreds of applications, I finally landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Ravenwood. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. The problem? Housing costs in the decent parts of town were completely out of my budget. I had to make a choice. Either move back in with my parents 2 hours away and commute, or find somewhere cheap to live. Being stubborn and wanting my independence, I chose the latter. That's how I ended up in the Westbrook area, the kind of neighborhood where you don't go out after dark if you can help it. My apartment was a tiny one-bedroom on the ground floor of an old building. The rent was suspiciously affordable, which should have been my first clue. During the viewing, the landlord rushed through everything, barely making eye contact when I asked about security. "Just keep your doors locked," he said, "like anywhere else." It wasn't until after I signed the lease that my co-worker Miranda pulled me aside during lunch. "Westbrook? Victoria, are you serious? That's where those 3 women were attacked last year." She proceeded to fill me in on the neighborhood's reputation, the break-ins, the assaults, even 2 unsolved murders within the past 18 months, all within blocks of my new place. By then, it was too late. I'd signed a 6-month lease and spent most of my savings on the security deposit. I told myself it would be fine. I'd get a better deadbolt, maybe one of those door jams, and definitely pepper spray. I'd be careful. It was only temporary. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I left for work before sunrise and got home just as it was getting dark. I kept to myself. No one bothered me. I was starting to think everyone had exaggerated about the neighborhood. Then last Tuesday happened. I had taken a half day off work to deal with some paperwork for my student loans. It was around 3 in the afternoon, and I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table when I heard a scratching at my front door. Not aggressive scratching, just a light, deliberate sound. At first, I ignored it. In this neighborhood, you learn quickly not to respond to every noise. But then it happened again, followed by what sounded like a soft whine. I peeked through the peephole and saw nothing. Confused, I looked through the small window next to my door, and that's when I saw it. A huge white German shepherd sitting patiently on my doorstep, looking directly at the door as if it knew I was watching. This wasn't some scrawny stray. The dog was massive, clean, and healthy looking. No collar though. Its fur was pristine white, almost glowing in the afternoon sun, and it had these intense amber eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware. I've always loved dogs. Growing up, we had 2 labs that were basically my siblings, but living alone in a sketchy neighborhood, a strange dog at my door made me nervous. Still, something about this one seemed different. It wasn't pacing or barking, just sitting there waiting. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. The dog immediately stood up but didn't try to push its way in. It just looked at me, tilting its head slightly. "Hey there," I said softly. "Are you lost?" The dog blinked slowly, then lowered its head slightly, almost like a bow. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly what it looked like. I slipped my hand through the gap in the door, letting the dog sniff me. It gently pressed its nose against my palm, then gave it a small lick. No aggression, no excitement, just calm acknowledgement. Something about this interaction made me feel safe enough to unchain the door. The dog backed up as I opened it wider, giving me space. It was even bigger than I'd thought, easily 90 pounds with powerful shoulders and legs. "You hungry, buddy?" I asked. The dog's tail wagged once, very slightly. I hadn't gone grocery shopping yet that week, so all I had were some hot dogs in the fridge. I grabbed the package and held one out. The dog approached cautiously, took the hot dog with surprising gentleness, then sat down to eat it. What struck me as odd was how little interest it showed in the food. Most strays would have wolfed it down, but this dog ate slowly, deliberately, all while keeping its eyes on me. When I offered another, it declined, backing away slightly. "You want to come in for a bit? Get some water?" I held the door open wider. The dog hesitated, then stepped inside. It didn't explore or sniff around like dogs usually do in new places. Instead, it walked calmly to the center of my living room, looked around once, then settled on the floor with a heavy sigh. I filled a bowl with water and set it down. The dog lapped at it briefly, then went back to its spot on the floor. For about 20 minutes, it just stayed there while I went back to my paperwork. Every time I looked up, those amber eyes were watching me. Then, without warning, it stood up and walked to the door. I got the message and let it out. The dog paused on my doorstep, turned to look at me one more time, then trotted away down the street until I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't think much more about it that day. Strange encounter, sure, but nothing that seemed important. I went about my evening routine, made dinner, watched some Netflix, talked to my mom on the phone. Around 11, I went to bed. My bedroom is at the back of the apartment, with a window that faces a small yard separating my building from the next one over. There are some bushes right outside, and beyond that, a chain-link fence. Not exactly scenic, but I kept the blinds closed most of the time anyway. I fell asleep quickly that night. I was exhausted from stress about money and work. Around 2 in the morning, something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just part of a dream, a rustling sound outside my window. Then I heard it again, more distinct. Someone was moving in the bushes. My heart immediately started racing. Living where I do, your mind goes to the worst places. Break-in, assault, all those stories Miranda had told me. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The rustling continued, and then I heard what sounded like the scrape of metal against my window screen. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. A low, deep growl came from outside. The kind of sound that triggers something primal in your brain. It wasn't coming from whatever was rustling in the bushes. It was coming from something else out there. The rustling stopped abruptly. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then all hell broke loose. I heard the most ferocious barking I've ever heard in my life, followed by a man's voice shouting, "Fuck! Get off me! Fuck!" There were sounds of a struggle, thrashing in the bushes, more barking, more shouting, and then a high-pitched yelp that could only have come from a dog. The man yelled again, this time in pain. I heard something heavy hit the ground, then footsteps running away. The barking stopped, replaced by what sounded like panting and a soft whining. Then those sounds faded too. I was paralyzed with fear, huddled under my blankets with my phone clutched in my hand. I waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes before I found the courage to call 911. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 officers checked the perimeter of my apartment while I waited inside, doors locked, lights on. When they knocked, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Ma'am," the older officer said, "you're going to want to see this." They led me to my bedroom window. The screen had been partially cut open with what they said was probably a knife. There was blood on the bushes, a lot of it, and a trail of it leading away from my window toward the street. But what really got to me was what they pointed out next. Mixed in with the blood, caught in the bushes and scattered across my front porch, were tufts of white fur. "Looks like someone tried to break in," the younger officer said. But something interrupted them. "You have a dog?" I shook my head, unable to speak as the realization hit me. The white German Shepherd had come back. It had somehow known to stand guard outside my apartment. It had fought off whoever was trying to break in, possibly saving my life. The officers took my statement and said they'd increased patrols in the area. They also strongly suggested I look for somewhere else to live. Before they left, the older officer, who hadn't said much, looked at me with a strange expression. "You know," he said, "my grandmother used to say some dogs aren't just dogs. In the old country, they believed certain animals were sent to protect people who needed it." He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Just reminded me of that, is all." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I went outside to look around in the daylight. There was still blood on the ground, now dried brown, and those tufts of white fur bright against the dark soil. I gathered a few pieces of the fur, not really knowing why, maybe as proof that I hadn't imagined it all. I spent that day in a daze. I called in sick to work. I looked for another apartment online, and I kept watching out the window, half hoping to see that white dog again. But it never came back. Not that day, not the next. I've moved in with Miranda temporarily while I look for a new place. I told her everything, and while she believes something happened, I can tell she thinks the dog part might be my mind trying to make sense of a traumatic event. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. That dog, whatever it was, appeared the afternoon before someone tried to break into my apartment. It came back in the middle of the night and stood guard. It fought off my attacker and possibly got hurt doing so. The police later told me there had been 3 break-ins on my street in the past month, all following the same pattern, all targeting women living alone. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened. Was it just a stray that happened to be in the right place? Was it someone's pet that got loose? Or was it something else entirely? Something sent specifically to protect me? All I know is that I owe my life to that dog. And even though I never saw it again after that night, I find myself looking for it everywhere I go. Every white dog I see makes my heart skip. I've started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, and I've decided that as soon as I find a safer place to live, I'm going to adopt a dog of my own. Some people might call it superstition, but I believe that dog was my guardian that night, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt. Story 12 மணி 40 நிமிடம். I've never been the type to share personal stuff online, but what happened last month in my house has been eating away at me, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. I live in Pine Grove with my husband Derek, his dad Gerald, who moved in with us after his retirement, and our 3 German shepherds, Max, Luna, and Rufus. Rufus is my service dog, and he's massive even for a German Shepherd. He's been with me for 6 years now, trained to help with my anxiety and to alert me before panic attacks. He's never failed me, not once. Our house is pretty old, built in the 70s, and has all these quirks that you get used to over time. The front door is this heavy metal thing that makes this specific sound when it opens. A loud squeak followed by this vibrating slam that echoes through the whole house. Everyone in the family recognizes it instantly. It's so distinct that we joke about never needing a doorbell. Anyway, it was a Tuesday afternoon, around 2 o'clock. Derek was at work, Gerald had gone to visit his brother in the next town over, and I was home alone with the dogs. I was in the living room working on my laptop with Rufus passed out at my feet like he always does. Max and Luna were somewhere upstairs, probably napping on our bed even though they're not supposed to. I remember feeling really tired that day. Derek and I had this massive fight the night before, one of those stupid arguments that blows up into something bigger. It was about money as usual. I wanted to renovate the kitchen, but Derek thought we should wait another year. I said some things I regret. He stormed off to sleep in the spare room, and we were still giving each other the cold shoulder that morning before he left for work. So I was sitting there, half working, half stewing over the argument when I heard it. the unmistakable sound of our front door opening. That specific squeak slam that you couldn't mistake for anything else. I didn't think much of it at first. Gerald sometimes comes home early without warning, or Derek might have forgotten something and come back to get it. But then I noticed Rufus. He'd been in such a deep sleep that he was snoring, but the moment that door opened, his eyes shot wide open. I've never seen him look like that before. His ears went completely erect, his eyes were bulging, and there was this, I don't know how else to describe it except pure terror on his face. He didn't bark or growl, he just stared toward the hallway with this expression that made my skin crawl. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps moving from the front door into the hallway. I called out, "Gerald, is that you?" No answer, just more footsteps moving toward the kitchen now. I wasn't scared yet, annoyed maybe, thinking Gerald was ignoring me because he'd sided with Derek in our argument. But then Rufus did something that sent ice through my veins. He whimpered. Not just any whimper, but this confused, frightened sound I'd never heard him make before. He was trained to alert to danger, to protect me, but instead he was cowering. The footsteps continued through the kitchen, heading toward the back door. This is when things got even weirder. Rufus suddenly bolted up and ran to the doggy door, squeezing his massive body through it like he couldn't get outside fast enough. Max and Luna must have heard the commotion because they came tearing down the stairs and followed him out. This was completely out of character. Usually, when someone comes home, the dogs rush to greet them, tails wagging, jumping all over the place, but they weren't greeting anyone. They were running away from something. I got up and cautiously moved to the kitchen window to look out into the backyard. All 3 dogs were at the back door, sniffing around like they expected to find someone there. But there was nobody. The footsteps were still inside the house. My heart was pounding now. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Derek, or maybe even 911. But then I hesitated. What would I say? There are footsteps in my house, but my dogs can't find anyone. I'd sound crazy. The footsteps continued, moving from the kitchen back through the hallway, into the living room where I'd been sitting, then up the stairs. I could hear them clearly, each creak of the floorboards, the slight change in sound when they moved from carpet to hardwood. It was as if someone was systematically walking through every room of our house. This went on for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes of me frozen in place, watching my dogs outside, listening to someone, or something, move through my house. And then, as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. No sound of a door opening or closing. They just stopped. The dogs stayed outside for another 20 minutes before cautiously coming back in. Rufus was the last one, and when he finally came back through the doggy door, he looked different, subdued. He kept glancing around like he expected to see something. By this point, I'd convinced myself it must have been Gerald. Maybe he'd come home, gone upstairs to change, and then left again without saying anything to me. It would be petty, but after our fight, I wouldn't put it past either him or Derek to give me the silent treatment. I tried to go back to work, but I couldn't focus. Rufus wouldn't leave my side, pressing himself against my leg the whole time. He's a service dog, so he's supposed to stay close, but this was different. He was clingy, almost desperate to be touching me. Derek got home around 3:30, an hour after the footsteps stopped. I was still sitting in the living room, pretending to work, but actually just staring at my screen, with Rufus glued to my side. The moment Derek walked in, with the familiar squeak slam of the door, Rufus didn't even get up to greet him. That's when Derek noticed the puddle. There was a large puddle of urine on the carpet where Rufus had been lying earlier before the footsteps started. Derek was immediately concerned. Rufus hasn't had an accident in the house since he was a puppy. He's meticulously trained, and even when we're gone for hours, he holds it until we take him out. "What's wrong with Rufus?" Derek asked, the fight from the night before momentarily forgotten. I told him what happened, the footsteps, Rufus's behavior, everything. I expected him to dismiss it, to tell me I was imagining things or that it was just the house settling, but instead, his face went pale. "Dad's not home, is he?" he asked. "I thought it was him," I said. "Is he not back yet?" Derek immediately called his dad. Gerald answered right away, saying he was still at his brother's place and wouldn't be back until dinner time. That's when we realized someone else had been in our house. Derek grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and we searched every room, every closet, under every bed. Nothing, no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. It was as if those footsteps had never existed, except for Rufus's accident and his continuing strange behavior. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, our fight completely forgotten in light of what happened, Derek hesitantly brought up something I hadn't considered. "You know," he said quietly, "my mom died in this house 16 years ago this month." His mother had passed away from cancer before I met him. She'd been sick for a long time and had chosen to spend her final days at home rather than in a hospital. She died in what is now our bedroom. "Do you think—" I started, not sure how to finish the question. "I don't know," Derek said, "but Dad mentioned something weird the other day. He said he found Mom's old sweater in his closet, one he thought he'd donated years ago. He was going to tell you, but then you two had that fight. I'm not sure what to make of all this. I've always believed in the possibility of spirits or ghosts or whatever you want to call them, but I'm also the kind of person who looks for logical explanations first. Could it have been an intruder who somehow got in and out without leaving a trace? Could it have been the house settling in some strange, coordinated way that just happened to sound exactly like footsteps? Could Rufus have had some kind of seizure or medical event that made him behave so strangely? None of these explanations feel right. What keeps coming back to me is Rufus's face when he heard that door open. Dogs sense things we can't. They don't make up stories or imagine things. Something was in our house that day, something that terrified my brave, loyal service dog so much that he wet himself and ran away instead of protecting me. It's been a month, and nothing like this has happened again, but I'm still jumpy whenever I'm home alone. I find myself listening for that distinctive squeak slam of the front door. And Rufus, he's mostly back to normal, but sometimes I catch him staring at empty corners of the house, his ears perked up, like he's listening to something I can't hear. I don't know what was in my house that day. I don't know if it was Derek's mom checking in on us after our fight, or something else entirely. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw in my dog's eyes. And sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I swear I can hear those footsteps again, just at the edge of my hearing, walking slowly, deliberately through the rooms of my home. Story 13. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family before. Honestly, I'm not even sure I should be writing this down now, but after what happened last night, I need to tell someone who might understand. I need to know if anyone else has experienced anything like this. I'm 21 now, but this has been happening to me since I was a little kid. Whatever this thing is, it's been following me for almost my entire life, and it always shows up when I'm in that weird state between being awake and falling asleep. The first time I remember it happening, I was probably 4 years old. We were living in this small house in Oak Ridge, just a quiet little town where nothing ever happens. I had begged my mom for days to set up this little camouflage tent in our playroom so I could play camping. She finally gave in, and I was so excited. I remember dragging my sleeping bag and pillow inside, along with my favorite stuffed animals and a flashlight. That night, I convinced my parents to let me sleep in the tent. My mom was hesitant, but eventually said yes, probably just to avoid another meltdown. The playroom was right across from my parents' bedroom, so they could hear me if I needed anything. I fell asleep quickly, worn out from all the excitement, but sometime in the middle of the night, I don't know what time it was, I woke up to this weird sound. It was like something was brushing against the outside of the tent. At first, I thought it was our cat, but it didn't sound right. The movement was too deliberate, too slow. It was like someone was running their hand along the fabric, circling around me. I froze. I was too scared to call out for my parents. The sound stopped after a minute, and then I heard something else. A creaking noise. I had this baby doll swing in the playroom, one of those wind-up ones that would rock back and forth, and it was moving. I could hear it clearly, the rhythmic squeaking getting faster and faster. I was terrified, but somehow found the courage to unzip the tent just enough to peek out. What I saw still gives me chills. The baby doll swing was going at full force, like someone had wound it up as tight as it would go. But there was nobody there. No one had come into the room. I would have heard the door, and my parents were still asleep across the hall. I could hear my dad snoring. I stayed frozen, watching that swing until it finally slowed down and stopped. I was too scared to leave the tent, so I just pulled my sleeping bag over my head and somehow eventually fell back asleep. When I told my mom the next morning, she said I must have wound it up before bed and forgotten about it, but I hadn't. I know I hadn't. We moved to a different house when I was 5, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. The new place was bigger, with more rooms and a yard with actual trees. For a while, nothing happened, and I almost forgot about that night in the tent. Then, when I was 7, my older sister had a sleepover with her friends. There weren't enough beds, so I ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room. I remember waking up in the middle of the night needing to pee. After I came back from the bathroom, I laid down and pulled my blanket up to my chin. I was just closing my eyes, right at that moment when you're not quite asleep but not fully awake either, and that's when it happened. My blanket was suddenly whipped off me, not like it slid off or I kicked it. It was violently yanked away, like someone standing at the foot of the couch had grabbed it with both hands and ripped it off me. It happened so fast and with so much force that I felt the rush of air. The blanket landed in a heap on the floor, several feet away from the couch. I sat up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The living room was dark except for the little nightlight by the hallway. I was paralyzed with fear, staring into the darkness, convinced someone was standing there watching me. But there was nothing, at least nothing I could see. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I managed to grab my blanket and run to my parents' room. I told them someone was in the house. My dad checked every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing. He said I must have had a bad dream and kicked the blanket off myself, but I know what happened. It wasn't a dream, and I didn't kick that blanket. Something pulled it off me. After that, things were quiet for a while. I had almost convinced myself that maybe my parents were right. Maybe I did have an overactive imagination. Maybe I was just a weird kid who had vivid dreams. But then last year, when I was 20, it came back, and it was worse. Much worse. I had my own apartment by then, a small one-bedroom place not far from the community college where I was taking classes. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I liked having my own space. My bed was pushed up against the wall with a nightstand on one side and a dresser at the foot of the bed. There wasn't much room to move around. You had to squeeze between the dresser and the bed to get to the other side of the room. One night in October, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone. It was around midnight, and I was getting tired. I put my phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and closed my eyes. I was in that drifting off state, where your thoughts start to get weird and jumbled, but you're still kind of aware of your surroundings, and then it felt like the world exploded around me. My mattress suddenly jerked sideways with so much force that I was thrown against the wall. The whole bed moved, not just the mattress, but the entire bed frame. It was like someone had grabbed the side of my mattress and yanked it as hard as they could. I screamed and scrambled to turn on my lamp. My bed had been pulled about 8 or 10 inches away from the wall. The dresser at the foot of my bed hadn't moved at all. It was still exactly where it had been, which made no sense. There wasn't enough space for someone to have gotten between the dresser and the bed to pull it, and even if there had been, the amount of strength it would take to move a queen-sized bed with me on it like that, it's not possible. Not for a normal person. I sat there, pressed against the headboard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I kept thinking there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe there was an earthquake, but nothing else in the room had moved. Just my bed. The worst part was, I didn't know what to do. Call the police and tell them what? That a ghost moved my bed? Call my parents at midnight and tell them I was scared of something I couldn't even explain? So I did the only thing I could think of. I fixed everything. I pushed my bed back against the wall, hands shaking the whole time. I checked all the windows and the door. Everything was locked. I was alone in my apartment. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat up with all the lights on, jumping at every little creak and sound. When the sun finally came up, I convinced myself that maybe the bed frame had some kind of structural issue. Maybe it collapsed in a weird way that made it seem like it moved. I knew that wasn't what happened, but it was easier than accepting the alternative. After that night, the incidents started happening more frequently. Sometimes it would be small things. My phone would slide off the nightstand right as I was falling asleep, or my bedroom door would slowly creak open even though I remembered closing it. Other times it was more aggressive. My sheets would be pulled tight around my legs, or I'd feel something pressed down on the mattress next to me. It was always when I was in that state between wakefulness and sleep. Never when I was fully awake, and never when I was in a deep sleep. Always in that vulnerable in-between moment. Last night was the worst it's ever been. I had fallen asleep watching TV and woke up around 3 in the morning. I turned off the TV and was drifting back to sleep when I felt it. That familiar sensation that something was in the room with me. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I kept my eyes closed. Over the years, I've learned that sometimes if I just pretend to be asleep, nothing happens. But last night was different. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath when I finally opened my eyes. That's when my mattress was yanked again. Not just moved, but partially pulled off the bed frame. The foot of the mattress was hanging off, suspended in midair. I scrambled to grab onto the headboard to keep from sliding off. And that's when I snapped. "Get out!" I screamed. "Get out of my house! Leave me alone!" I don't know why I thought yelling would do anything, but I was beyond scared. I was angry. This thing, whatever it is, has been terrorizing me for almost my entire life, and I was sick of it. The mattress slammed back down onto the frame with such force that it bounced me up into the air. Then everything went still. The room slowly warmed back up. The heavy feeling in the air dissipated. I stayed awake until morning, afraid to close my eyes again. I've spent the whole day today researching, trying to find answers. I don't know what this thing is or why it's attached itself to me. I don't know why it only comes when I'm falling asleep or what it wants from me. All I know is that it's real. It's been following me since I was a child, and I'm terrified of what it might do next. Because each time it comes back, it gets more aggressive, more physical. And I don't know how to make it stop. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Does anyone know what I'm dealing with or how to make it go away? Because I don't know how many more nights like last night I can handle. Story 14. I never thought I'd be the person typing this out, but I need to share my story somewhere. Maybe someone here has dealt with something similar or can offer advice beyond what I've already tried. I've been living in my condo in Pine Haven for over 5 years now. It's a nice suburban neighborhood, good schools, well-kept lawns, the kind of place where people jog with their golden retrievers. But from literally the first night I moved in, I knew something was off. I've always been sensitive to spirits. Ever since I was a kid, I'd pick up on things others couldn't. Cold spots, whispers, the feeling of being watched. My mum was the same way. When I was house hunting and found this place, I was so excited about the price and location that I ignored the weird feeling I got during the walkthrough. Big mistake. The first night, I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in my hallway. I figured it was just the building settling, or maybe a neighbor. By the end of the first week, I knew better. My dryer door would swing open while I was in another room. The bathroom faucet would turn on by itself. Utensils would fall off the counter when nobody was near them. At first, I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the dryer door latch was loose. Maybe the faucet had water pressure issues. But then things got worse, much worse. I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. Not just vague movements, but distinct human-shaped shadows. Sometimes I'd feel a cold breeze pass right through me, even with all the windows closed. I'd wake up with unexplainable scratches on my arms or legs. After about 6 months, I became convinced there were multiple spirits in my home. Based on the different manifestations and energies I feel, I'm pretty sure there are at least 6 permanent residents, plus others that seem to come and go. There's one that hangs out in the bathroom. That's the one that messes with the faucets and sometimes moves my makeup around. There's another in the kitchen that seems more mischievous than malevolent. It knocks things over but never breaks anything expensive. The worst one stays in the spare bedroom. I keep that door closed now. My friends started noticing it too. My best friend Amber refused to come over after she saw a book fly off my shelf during movie night. She literally grabbed her purse and ran out the door. My other friend Matt said he felt like he was being watched the whole time he was here. Eventually they all stopped coming over. We meet at restaurants or their places now. Last year I tried renting out the spare room to help with the mortgage. My dad had just retired and needed a temporary place while his new condo was being renovated. He's not sensitive to spirits at all. He's always been the skeptical type who laughs at ghost stories. He moved out after less than 4 months. He didn't even unpack most of his boxes. When I asked him why, he just said, "You know why, Zoe." He still won't talk about what he experienced. I've tried everything to cleanse the place. I've used holy water in every room. I've burned sage so many times my neighbors probably think I'm running an illicit herb shop. I've tried Palo Santo, salt barriers, crystal grids. Nothing works for more than a day or two. It's like the spirits are too deeply attached to this place to leave. About 3 months ago, things escalated in a way that truly terrified me. My boyfriend Lucas was staying over. He's one of the few people brave enough to still visit. We were both half asleep around 2 in the morning when we clearly heard a man's voice say, "Hello," right between us in the bed. Lucas shot up and turned on the light. There was nobody there, of course, but we both heard it, clear as day. It wasn't muffled or distant. It sounded like someone was laying right between us. Since then, the same voice has started appearing in my dreams. I'll be having a normal dream about work or family, and suddenly this man will walk into the scene and start talking to me. He always introduces himself as Robert, and he always says he belongs here. I wake up in a cold sweat every time. Last month, things got physical. I was walking down the hallway to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I felt hands grab my ankles. Not just a brush or a cold spot, actual pressure, like fingers digging in. I fell forward and barely caught myself before my head hit the doorframe. There were faint red marks on my ankles the next morning. There have been other physical interactions that I don't even want to detail here. Some of them have been inappropriate. Let's just say I no longer change clothes in certain rooms of the house, and I always keep the bathroom door locked, even though I live alone. You're probably wondering why I don't just move out. Believe me, I've thought about it every single day. But the housing market in this area is insane, and my mortgage is ridiculously affordable. I bought at exactly the right time, and I'd never find anything even close to this price point again. I'm planning to move out of the country in about 2 years for work, so I figure I can stick it out until then and sell the place. I've tried researching the history of the building, but there's nothing obviously sinister. It was built in the 1990s, so it's not like it's an ancient burial ground or anything. The condo association keeps meticulous records, and according to them, there have been no deaths in my unit. One elderly man passed away in the unit below mine about 10 years ago, but that's it. The weirdest part is that the hauntings seem to extend beyond the walls of my condo. Twice now I've gone on vacation and had neighbors check in on my cats. Both times they've reported strange occurrences. My neighbor Diane was feeding the cats last summer while I was in Florida, and she swears my TV turned on by itself while she was there. She also said she kept feeling like someone was standing right behind her. My other neighbor Miguel said he heard whispering coming from my bedroom when he came to check on the cats in December. The bedroom door was closed, and when he opened it, there was no one there, but the room was freezing cold, despite the thermostat being set to 72 degrees. Just last week, something happened that made me question my own sanity. I was in the shower, and I could see the shower curtain moving slightly, like someone was running their fingers along it from the outside. I figured it was just the air current from the bathroom fan. But then I saw a handprint press against the curtain, a full, adult-sized handprint pushing the plastic curtain inward. I jumped out so fast I nearly broke my neck, but of course, there was no one there. That night, Lucas stayed over again. We were both exhausted and fell asleep quickly. Around 4 in the morning, we both woke up to the sound of someone clearing their throat at the foot of the bed. Lucas turned on the lamp, and we saw nothing, but the room was so cold we could see our breath. Then we heard a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." Lucas grabbed his things and left. He hasn't been back since, and honestly, I don't blame him. I've started sleeping with all the lights on. It doesn't help much, but it makes me feel slightly better. The other night, I woke up around 3, always 3 for some reason, and saw someone sitting in the chair in the corner of my bedroom. It looked like an older man wearing old-fashioned clothes, like something from the 1940s or 50s. He was just watching me. When I blinked, he was gone. I've tried communicating with them directly. I've asked them what they want, why they're here, if there's something I can do to help them move on. Sometimes I get responses in the form of knocks or electronic devices turning on and off, but nothing coherent. The only clear communication I've gotten is that hello and the message that I shouldn't be here. The worst part is the isolation. I can't invite friends over. I can't have family stay with me. I can't even bring up what's happening to most people because they either think I'm making it up or they get too freaked out. My sister suggested I see a psychiatrist, which was hurtful. I know what I'm experiencing is real. 2 days ago, I came home from work to find all of my framed photos turned face down, every single one, throughout the entire condo, and on my bathroom mirror, written in the condensation as if someone had taken a shower, were the words, "Almost time." I took photos of everything before wiping it away, but when I looked at the pictures later, the writing wasn't visible. Last night was the final straw. I was trying to sleep despite hearing footsteps pacing back and forth in my living room. Suddenly, my bedroom door slammed shut on its own. Then the footsteps came right up to my bed. I felt the mattress sink down like someone sitting on the edge. I couldn't move. Classic sleep paralysis, I thought. But then I felt cold fingers brush my cheek, and a voice whispered directly in my ear, "We've been waiting for you to join us." I don't know what that means, and I don't want to find out. I'm writing this from a hotel room. I've called a realtor, and I'm listing the condo tomorrow. Housing market be damned. I'll take the financial hit. No amount of money is worth this. The thing that scares me most is wondering, were they there before I moved in, or did I somehow bring them with me? And if I sell the place, am I just passing this nightmare on to someone else? Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about the day I realized we weren't alone in our house. I was 10 years old when my parents decided to move us to Westbrook. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest 2-story home with faded blue siding and a creaky front porch. But it was bigger than our old apartment, and my parents were so excited about finally having a yard. The first few months were normal. We unpacked, I started at my new school, and slowly the house began to feel like home. My little brother Connor was 6 at the time, and my older sister Vanessa was 13. We each got our own rooms for the first time ever. Mine was on the 2nd floor, facing the backyard. I can still remember the exact moment everything changed. It was about 8 months after we moved in. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Connor came running in, his face pale. "Eliza," he whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "There's a girl in your room." I rolled my eyes. Connor was always making up stories to get attention. "Stop being weird," I told him, trying to focus on my math problems. "I'm not lying," he insisted, his voice trembling. "She's standing by your window looking out. She has glasses and her hair is like this." He put his hands at his shoulders to show the length. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. Connor wasn't usually afraid of things. He was the kid who checked under the bed for monsters just to prove they weren't real. I'd never seen him look so genuinely scared. Mom overheard us and went upstairs to check my room. Of course, there was nobody there. She told Connor it was just his imagination, but he wouldn't let it go. For days afterward, he refused to go upstairs alone. I tried to forget about it, but about a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. The moonlight was casting weird shadows on my wall, and I could have sworn I saw movement near my window. I pulled the blanket over my head and eventually fell back asleep, convincing myself it was nothing. The next morning, I found my school papers scattered across my desk, even though I'd stacked them neatly the night before. When I mentioned it to my mom, she said it was probably just a draft from the vent, but things kept happening. Small things at first, objects not being where I left them, the feeling of being watched. Then one night, I was reading in bed when I heard a distinct tapping on my window, 3 sharp knocks, like someone using their knuckles. I froze. My window faced the backyard, and my room was on the 2nd floor. There was no way anyone could be knocking on my window unless they had a really tall ladder, and I would have heard someone setting up a ladder outside. The knocking came again. 3 more taps. I was too terrified to look. Instead, I ran to my parents' room and told them someone was trying to get in through my window. My dad checked the backyard with a flashlight. Nothing. No ladder. No footprints in the flower beds below my window. Nothing disturbed at all. My parents thought I was having nightmares or making it up for attention, but it kept happening. Random knocking at night, always in sets of 3. Sometimes I'd hear it while doing homework. Sometimes it would wake me from a dead sleep. After about 2 weeks of this, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep. My grades were slipping, and I was jumping at every little noise. That's when Vanessa, surprisingly, came to my rescue. "Switch rooms with me," she offered one morning. "I don't believe in that ghost stuff. If someone's really messing with you, I'll catch them." My parents agreed it might help, thinking my imagination would calm down in a new space. So that weekend, we swapped rooms. Vanessa took my room with the backyard view, and I moved into her room facing the side of the house. The first night was peaceful. I slept better than I had in weeks, but at breakfast the next morning, Vanessa looked terrible. "Did you put Connor up to it?" she demanded, dark circles under her eyes. "Up to what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The knocking. It went on for like an hour, on and off. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. My blood ran cold. I didn't ask Connor to do anything. Connor, who was pouring cereal at the counter, looked up. "I didn't knock on anything. I was asleep." My parents exchanged looks. Dad went outside again, examining the side of the house, checking if there was any way someone could reach Vanessa's, now my, window. There wasn't. Not without a serious climbing effort that would have left marks. That's when we started calling her Rosie. Connor said that's what the girl he saw looked like, some character from a book his teacher had read to his class. The name stuck, and somehow giving her a name made her less scary. Over the next few months, we all experienced Rosie's presence. Papers would rustle when there was no breeze. One time, a pencil flew off my desk and landed about 3 feet away, like someone had flicked it with their finger. Kitchen cabinets would be open in the morning when everyone swore they'd closed them the night before. The knocking continued, but less frequently. It would happen maybe once every couple of weeks, always 3 knocks, always at night. We began to get used to it, as crazy as that sounds. "Rosie's active tonight," Mom would say casually if we heard something unexplainable. It became almost normal, living with our invisible housemate. The thing is, Rosie never seemed malicious. Mischievous, sure, but not evil. She never broke anything valuable or hurt any of us. It was almost like having an invisible pet, one that occasionally made noise and moved things around. One of the weirdest things Rosie did was mess with electronics. The TV would turn on by itself, always to static channels. My alarm clock would go off at random times. Once, my CD player started blasting music at 3 in the morning when it wasn't even plugged in. When I was 12, I got brave enough to talk to her. "Rosie," I said one night before bed, feeling slightly ridiculous, "I have a math test tomorrow. Please don't knock on my window tonight." To my surprise, There was no knocking that night, or the next. In fact, Rosie seemed to quiet down whenever I asked her to. Years passed this way. We'd experience weird occurrences, acknowledge them with a "thanks, Rosie," and move on with our lives. Vanessa eventually went to college. Connor grew into a teenager who pretended he was too cool to believe in ghosts, though I noticed he still wouldn't go in the attic alone, and I finished high school. When I was 19, I started dating Nathan. He was studying engineering and was the most logical, skeptical person I'd ever met. I didn't tell him about Rosie at first. How do you casually mention that your family home is haunted? But after we'd been together for a year, my parents invited him to stay for a week during summer break. I finally told him the night before he arrived. He laughed, thinking I was joking. "Very funny, Eliza. You almost had me there." "I'm serious," I insisted. "Just keep an open mind, okay? And if weird stuff happens, try not to freak out." He promised he wouldn't, still clearly thinking I was messing with him. The first 2 days of his visit were quiet. No knocking, no moving objects, nothing unusual at all. I started to think maybe Rosie had finally moved on. But on the third night, we were watching a movie in the living room when Connor's old toy robot, which was sitting on a shelf, suddenly lit up and started making noise. Nathan jumped, then laughed. "Battery glitch," he said confidently, getting up to turn it off. When the robot kept going, despite him pressing the power button, he muttered, "Shut up already." The robot's automated voice suddenly said, "Bye-bye," which wasn't one of its programmed phrases, and went silent. Nathan looked at me, his face pale. "That was weird, right? That's not supposed to happen?" I just nodded. That night, Nathan was sleeping in our guest room when he came running into my room around 2 in the morning, looking terrified. "There's someone in the house," he whispered urgently. I heard thumping, like someone walking around upstairs. My room was upstairs. The guest room was downstairs. There couldn't be anyone walking upstairs from his perspective unless they were on the roof. "What did it sound like exactly?" I asked. "Like 3 steps. Pause. 3 more steps. Over and over." I sighed. "That's just Rosie. She's probably walking around my old room." "This isn't funny anymore, Eliza," he said, clearly thinking I was playing an elaborate prank. "I told you our house was haunted. You didn't believe me." He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and he cut his visit short the next day. We broke up a few weeks later. He never said it was because of Rosie, but I knew. After that, I became more protective of Rosie in a weird way. She was part of our family's story, part of our home. When friends came over, I wouldn't mention her unless something happened that couldn't be explained away. Most people never noticed anything during short visits. The older I got, the more I wondered about who Rosie might have been. A previous owner's daughter, someone who died in the house. I did some research at the local library, but couldn't find any records of deaths in our home or any little girls named Rose who'd lived there. One theory my mom had was that Rosie wasn't dead at all. Maybe she was having out-of-body experiences while sleeping or in a coma somewhere. That would explain why her activities seemed random and why she never did anything truly harmful. Maybe she was just confused and lonely. Whatever or whoever Rosie is, she's been with us for over 10 years now. The knocking still happens occasionally. Things still move when no one's looking. The house still feels occupied even when I'm home alone. I've moved out for college now, but whenever I visit home, I make sure to say hello to Rosie. Sometimes, when I'm in my old room, I feel a slight pressure at the edge of my bed, like someone small is sitting there. I've learned not to be afraid of it. Last Christmas, I was home for the holidays when I noticed something new. A small patch of condensation on my bedroom window, roughly the size and shape of a child's hand. It was 5 degrees below zero outside, and the heating was on inside. The perfect conditions for someone warm to leave a handprint on a cold window. I placed my hand next to it. The print was significantly smaller than mine. "Merry Christmas, Rosie," I whispered. The knocking came then. 3 gentle taps on the glass, right next to where the handprint was fading. I don't know if we'll ever understand what Rosie is or why she's attached to our house. Maybe someday she'll move on, or maybe she'll still be knocking on windows long after we've all moved away. But in a strange way, I hope she stays. She's watched us grow up, been there for birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. She's as much a part of our home as the creaky third stair or the apple tree in the backyard. Sometimes I wonder if she's lonely, this watchful presence in our lives. I wonder if she's trying to tell us something with her knocks and movements, or maybe she's just a little girl playing the only games she can. All I know is that somewhere in our house right now, Rosie is watching. And in her own way, I think she's protecting us too. Story 16. I never believed in the afterlife, never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that stuff. My dad was a science teacher, and I grew up with a pretty rational view of the world. When someone died, they were gone. That was it. End of story. That was before Sarah died, before I felt her touch again. It's been almost 5 years now since I lost her. May 2nd, 2018, a date that's burned into my brain forever. I don't think I'll ever forget walking into our bedroom and finding her there, already gone. The needles still on the nightstand. I should probably back up a bit. Sarah and I had been married for 12 years when she hurt her back at work. She was a nurse, and she was helping move a patient when something just gave out. Herniated disc, severe nerve damage, the kind of injury that changes your life forever. The doctors put her on Percocet at first, then stronger stuff as her tolerance built up. Before I really understood what was happening, she was dependent on those pills. For 3 years, I watched the woman I loved disappear into addiction. She wasn't the Sarah I married anymore. She'd hide pills around the house, lie about doctor appointments, even took money from our savings to buy from dealers when her prescriptions ran out. We fought constantly. I threatened to leave more times than I can count. Finally, after catching her stealing my elderly mother's pain medication, I gave her an ultimatum: rehab or divorce. I think it scared her enough to finally agree to get help. The rehab facility was 2 hours away. I visited every weekend for 3 months while she went through treatment. It was hard, but when she came home, it felt like I had my wife back. The woman I fell in love with was returning to me, day by day. We started rebuilding our relationship. We went to couples therapy. She got involved with a recovery group. Things were good until they weren't. I don't know where she got the fentanyl. I never asked her friends or tried to track down who sold it to her. What would be the point? She was gone. The medical examiner said it was almost instant. 1 minute she was alive and the next, gone. The months after her death are honestly a blur. I functioned on autopilot. I went to work. I manage an IT department at a local college. I paid bills. I ate sometimes. But I wasn't really living. I just existed. I lost 20 pounds without even trying. Friends would invite me out, but I always had an excuse not to go. I just wanted to be alone in our house with her memories. When the holidays rolled around that year, I forced myself to attend a family dinner at Sarah's parents' house. Her mom mentioned how much they missed Sarah's Christmas cookies and gingerbread. Sarah had been an amazing baker. Me? I could barely make toast without burning it, but something about the sadness in her mom's eyes made me decide to try. I found Sarah's recipe box the next day. It was this old wooden thing that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside were dozens of handwritten cards with her perfect penmanship. I pulled out the ones for her famous ginger cookies and her chocolate peppermint bars. I spent an entire weekend in December trying to recreate them. The first batch was a disaster. The second was edible, but nothing like Sarah's. By the third attempt, I was getting closer. I kept at it until I had something I wasn't completely embarrassed to give her family. When I delivered the cookies to her parents and her sister's family, her mom hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. "They taste just like hers," she said, though I knew she was being kind. Still, it felt good to connect with Sarah's memory that way, to do something that made her family happy. I got home around 9 that night, exhausted but feeling a little lighter than I had in months. The kitchen was still a disaster from my baking marathon, so I started cleaning up. I was standing at the sink washing mixing bowls when it happened. I felt a hand on my lower back. Not just a vague pressure, but 5 distinct fingers. A gentle touch, right where Sarah used to rest her hand when she'd come up behind me while I was doing dishes. It was so real, so unmistakably a human touch, that I spun around immediately, expecting to see someone there. The kitchen was empty. I stood there, heart pounding, water dripping from my hands onto the floor. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't on medication, I was completely sober and alert, and I had just felt my dead wife's hand on my back as clearly as I'd ever felt it when she was alive. The strangest part wasn't the touch itself, though. It was what happened next. Instead of being terrified, I was suddenly overwhelmed with this sense of peace. This wave of calm washed over me, and I just stood there in my kitchen, soaking wet and covered in flour, feeling more at peace than I had since before Sarah died. I finished cleaning up and went to bed, convinced I'd imagined it. Grief does strange things to the mind, right? I'd been thinking about Sarah all day, baking her recipes, missing her. My brain had just manufactured a tactile memory. That had to be it. A few days passed. I went back to work, back to my routine. I didn't tell anyone about what happened in the kitchen. How could I? Hey, I think my dead wife touched me while I was doing dishes isn't exactly casual conversation material. Then it happened again. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, but not quite there yet. You know that fuzzy state where you're drifting off? I was right at that edge when I felt the mattress depress beside me, like someone was crawling into bed. I felt the covers move slightly. My first thought was that one of the neighborhood cats had somehow gotten in. We used to leave a window cracked in the summer, and occasionally a friendly tabby would find its way inside. Without opening my eyes, I swung my arm back, expecting to feel fur. There was nothing there. The space beside me was empty, but I could still feel the mattress dip down, could still feel something there. And then that same feeling of warmth and calm came over me again. It wasn't scary. It should have been terrifying, feeling someone in my bed when I was alone in a locked house. But instead, it felt right. It felt like Sarah. I laid there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever was happening. Finally, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you. I miss you, and I love you." The pressure beside me remained for a few more minutes, and then, gradually, it was gone. The mattress returned to normal. The room felt empty again. I never felt her touch again after that night. Part of me wishes I would, but mostly I'm grateful for those 2 experiences. They changed something fundamental in me. I went from being someone who scoffed at ghost stories to someone who, well, I don't know what I believe exactly, but I know what I felt. Some people would say it was just grief playing tricks on my mind. A psychiatrist would probably call it a tactile hallucination brought on by emotional stress. Maybe they're right. I don't have any evidence that what happened was real or supernatural. All I know is that the touch on my back felt exactly like Sarah's hand. The weight on the mattress felt exactly like her body, and the peace I felt afterward was the first real comfort I'd experienced since finding her that day. I still live in our house in Bridgewater. I've started dating again recently, though it's been awkward and difficult. I've never told any of my dates about what happened. I did tell Sarah's sister once after a few too many drinks at Thanksgiving. She cried and said she believed me. She said Sarah would find a way to let me know she was okay. Is that what happened? Was Sarah reaching out from somewhere else? I don't know. The logical part of my brain still tries to explain it away, but another part of me, a part I never knew existed before that night in the kitchen, believes that somehow some part of Sarah came back to comfort me when I needed it most. I still bake her cookies every Christmas. I've gotten pretty good at it, actually. Sometimes when I'm standing at the sink afterward, I find myself hoping to feel that gentle pressure on my lower back again. It hasn't happened, but sometimes, just for a moment, I'll feel that same sense of peace wash over me, and I'll know she's there. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. I'm not sure I would have believed it myself 5 years ago. But it happened. Whatever it was, ghost, memory, hallucination, It was real to me, and it changed me forever. Some bonds, I guess, really do transcend death itself. Story 17. I've been teaching karate at Crescent Moon Martial Arts Dojo in Oak Ridge for about 3 years now. Nothing weird or out of the ordinary had ever happened there until last Thursday. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back. I got to the dojo around 5:30 in the evening to prep for my 6:30 class. The place was empty, which was normal. My boss, Mike, usually leaves by 5, and I'm the only evening instructor on Thursdays. I like getting there early to sweep the floors, set up equipment, and center myself before students arrive. The dojo is in this older brick building downtown. It's got the main training floor with mirrors along one wall, a small lobby with a desk where we check people in, bathrooms in the back, and this private instruction room off to the side. That private room has this heavy steel door, like seriously heavy. It takes a decent push to open it, and it's got this rubber doorstop we use to keep it propped open during private lessons. I was sweeping the main floor when Mike unexpectedly came back. He'd forgotten to drop off some new focus pads and target shields for my class. He's a good guy, but always in a rush. "Hey Nathan, just dropping these off in the private room. Ordered some new gear for your teen class," he said, barely stopping as he walked across the floor I'd just swept. Typical Mike. I watched him carry the box into the private instruction room. He flicked on the lights, put the box down against the wall, and fully propped the door open with the rubber doorstop, pushing it in tight with his foot. The door was completely open, flat against the wall. "All yours. I'm heading out. Lock up when you're done," he said, jingling his keys. He walked to the front entrance, locked it from the inside. We use a key to lock and unlock from both sides, and left through the door. I heard the click of him locking it from the outside too. I went back to sweeping, working my way from the back of the main floor toward the front. The dojo was completely silent except for the sound of my broom on the hard wood. The sun was starting to set, and the light coming through the front windows was getting dimmer, casting long shadows across the floor. That's when it happened. Couldn't have been more than a minute after Mike left. Bang! The sound was so violent and sudden that I actually dropped the broom. The steel door to the private room had slammed shut with incredible force. And I mean slammed. Not like it had slowly swung closed and then clicked shut. This was like someone had grabbed that heavy door and thrown it closed with all their strength. The sound echoed through the entire dojo. My heart instantly started racing. I stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at the now closed door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. No response. I took a deep breath and walked toward the private room. The rational part of my brain was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe Mike hadn't propped the door open properly. Maybe the air pressure from the front door closing had somehow caused it. But I knew none of that made sense. That door was heavy and had been completely propped open. The doorstop was firmly in place, and I'd seen plenty of people enter and exit the front door hundreds of times. It had never caused any door in the building to move, let alone slam with such violence. When I reached the door, I hesitated before touching the handle. Something felt wrong. The air around the door felt colder, though that might have been my imagination or just adrenaline making me more sensitive. I finally pushed the door open, half expecting to see someone inside. The room was empty. Just the box of new equipment sitting against the wall where Mike had left it. The lights were still on. The doorstop was lying on the floor about 6 feet from the door, as if it had been forcefully ejected when the door slammed. I checked the entire room. It's not big, maybe 15 by 20 feet with padded floors and a few hanging bags in the corner. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. No closets, no other doors. The room has no windows, no vents large enough for even a child to crawl through. Nothing. I went back out to the main floor and looked around the entire dojo. Nobody was there. I was completely alone. At this point, I was genuinely freaked out, but I was trying to stay rational. I decided to test a few things. I propped the door open again, making sure the doorstop was firmly in place, just like Mike had done. Then I went to the front entrance and opened and closed that door multiple times. Nothing happened to the private room door. It stayed firmly propped open. I even turned the HVAC system on full blast, thinking maybe a sudden change in air pressure could have caused it. Nope. The door didn't budge. I went back and examined the door itself. It's a solid steel fire door, has to weigh at least 100 pounds. It doesn't swing freely. There's resistance in the hinges, and it takes effort to move it. There's no way it could have moved on its own, let alone slammed shut with such force. The doorstop was made of solid rubber, the kind that really grips the floor. When properly placed, it holds that heavy door without issues. Mike had definitely wedged it in properly. I saw him do it, pushing it in with his foot until it was secure. By this point, I had about 30 minutes before my students would start arriving. I tried to calm myself down. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what had just happened defied any logical explanation I could think of. I decided to try one more test. I propped the door open again and then sat down on the main floor mat directly facing it. I stayed completely still and just watched. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. The door didn't move at all. What really got to me wasn't just that the door had closed on its own, it was the way it had slammed. It wasn't a gentle swing shut. It was violent, aggressive even, like someone had put their full body weight into slamming it as hard as they possibly could. The sound had been explosive, echoing throughout the empty dojo. As I sat there staring at the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had slammed it had done so out of anger. That's what really sent chills down my spine. There was emotion behind that slam. It wasn't mechanical or random. It felt deliberate and rage-filled. With students arriving soon, I had to pull myself together. I finished sweeping, set up for class, and tried to act normal when the first kids arrived. Throughout the entire 90-minute class, I kept glancing at that door, which I'd left propped open. It didn't move once. After everyone left, I had to close up alone. I've never felt so uncomfortable in that space before. The dojo had always felt like a second home to me, a place of discipline and focus. Now it felt watched. As I was locking up, I remembered something Mike had once mentioned casually. The building was originally built in the 1940s and had been everything from a dance hall to a storage facility before becoming a martial arts studio. Mike had joked about getting the place for cheap because the previous tenant broke their lease early, claiming the place had bad energy. I'd laughed it off at the time. I didn't laugh anymore. The next day, I came in early again and asked Mike if anything strange had ever happened in the dojo. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking up from his computer. "Just weird things moving, noises." He gave me an odd look. "Buildings settle sometimes, pipes make noise. Why?" I almost told him about the door, but something held me back. It sounded crazy even in my own head. "No reason, just thought I heard something yesterday." He shrugged and went back to his work. I've been back to the dojo several times since then, but I haven't experienced anything else unusual. That door hasn't moved on its own again, despite me testing it multiple times. But here's the thing, I can't stop thinking about it. I've gone over every possible explanation. Wind. The door is in an interior room with no windows or exterior access. Air pressure from the HVAC. I tested that thoroughly. Nothing. Someone hiding in the building. I checked everywhere, and there was simply nowhere for anyone to hide. A prank? Nobody else was there, and the front door was locked from the outside when Mike left. I've been teaching martial arts for over a decade. I'm trained to be aware of my surroundings, to notice details, to maintain focus under pressure. I know what I experienced wasn't my imagination or some trick of perception. Something slammed that door, something with enough force to violently throw a 100-pound steel door shut and eject a firmly wedged doorstop several feet across the room. Something that wasn't human. I have to go back tonight to teach again. I've been trying to convince myself that it was just some freak occurrence with a logical explanation I haven't figured out yet, but deep down, I know better. Whatever is in that dojo, it wanted me to know it was there. It wanted me to feel its rage. I haven't told any of my students or the other instructors. What would I even say? But I find myself watching that door constantly now, waiting for it to move again. And sometimes when I'm alone in the dojo, I swear I can feel something watching me too. Story 18. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Growing up, I'd roll my eyes when my friends would talk about haunted houses or scary movies. I was always the rational one, the one who needed proof. But what happened in my family home has completely changed my perspective, and even now, 27 years later, I struggle to explain it. I grew up in Coalfield, a small mining town that most people have never heard of. Our house sits on a hill overlooking what used to be the entrance to the Black Rock mine. It's a beautiful old Victorian, built in 1905, with creaky floors and those gorgeous tall windows. What most people don't know when they first visit is that it was built directly above where 100 miners lost their lives in the collapse of 1874. My great-grandfather purchased the property dirt cheap because nobody wanted to live there after what happened. The first time I saw something I couldn't explain, I was 9 years old. I remember it was a school night, and I'd gone to bed around 9:30. I woke up suddenly around 2 in the morning. You know that feeling when you just know someone is watching you? That's exactly what I felt. When I opened my eyes, there was an elderly woman standing at the foot of my bed. She wasn't transparent or floating or anything like you see in movies. She looked completely solid, wearing what looked like a dark dress with a white collar. Her face was so clear, deep wrinkles, gray hair pulled back tightly, and eyes that seemed sad. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. I wasn't even scared at first, just confused. Then she simply wasn't there anymore. I didn't see her walk away or fade. She was just gone. I told my parents the next morning, and they exchanged this look I'll never forget. My dad just nodded and said, "That's Eleanor's house friend," like it was the most normal thing in the world. Apparently, my great-grandmother had seen her too, and my grandmother, and even my mom once or twice. They acted like it was just another quirk of the house, like the bathroom door that never quite closed right. As I got older, I convinced myself it had been a dream or my imagination until I was 17 and my boyfriend Matt was over for dinner. We were in the kitchen making pasta while my parents were out at a work function. We were laughing about something stupid when we both stopped mid-sentence. A white figure moved, no, shot, down the hallway past the kitchen doorway. It wasn't walking. It was like a flash of white that had a human shape. Matt's face went completely pale. "Did you see that?" he whispered. That's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. Matt had no idea about any of the weird stuff in our house. I'd never told him because I didn't want him to think I was crazy, but he saw it too, clear as day. We both did. After that, I started noticing more things. It was like once I acknowledged what was happening, the activity increased, or maybe I was just more aware of it. But the strangest part was how other people would notice things without being prompted. My parents hosted dinner parties every few months, and at least twice a year we'd have these big weekend gatherings with extended family and friends. What always freaked me out was how often someone, usually someone who had never been to our house before, would casually ask about the old woman. Not in a scared way, just curiously, like, "Hey, I saw an older woman upstairs earlier. Is that your grandmother?" And they'd always describe the same person I saw when I was 9. My little brother Jake had his own experiences too. When he was about 7, this would have been when I was in college, he came to breakfast one morning looking exhausted. When Mom asked if he'd had nightmares, he just shook his head and said, "The girl in the TV kept staring at me." He explained that he'd woken up around 3 in the morning and saw a reflection in his powered-off television screen. Not his own reflection, but a girl about his age, just staring back at him. When he moved, she didn't. When he waved, she didn't wave back. She just watched him until he pulled the covers over his head and eventually fell back asleep. What makes all this even weirder is that none of us ever felt threatened. It was unsettling, sure, but never malicious. It was like we were sharing the house with something else, something that had been there long before us. Even now, when I visit my parents, they still live in that house, strange things happen. Last Christmas, we were all sitting in the living room opening presents when the Alexa suddenly turned on by itself and started playing what sounded like old-timey radio music. Nobody was near it, and when we checked, it wasn't connected to anyone's phone. It was 3 in the morning exactly. I remember checking my watch. Objects disappear constantly. My mom will put her reading glasses on the nightstand, and they'll show up in the kitchen cabinet. My dad's tools migrate from the garage to random spots in the house. We'll hear random bangs and knocks with no explanation. Light bulbs burn out way faster than they should, especially in certain rooms, like the upstairs hallway and my old bedroom. The cold spots are another thing. You'll be walking through a perfectly warm room and suddenly hit a patch of air that's freezing cold. Not just cool, but bone-chilling cold that makes your skin prickle. These spots move around the house, never in the same place twice. Then there's the smell. Every few months, usually around the anniversary of the mine collapse in October, this foul odor will permeate parts of the house. It smells like sulfur mixed with something else I can't quite describe. Earthy and acrid. The first time it happened, my parents called plumbers thinking it was a gas leak or sewage problem. They found nothing. The really weird part? Our neighbors have smelled it too, even from outside the house. I've always wondered why I seem to experience more of these things than anyone else in my family. When I was about 12, a woman who claimed to be clairvoyant came to one of my mom's charity events. I remember she pulled my mother aside and told her that one of her daughters was gifted and would see things others couldn't. At the time, I was an only daughter. My sister came along a few years later, so that was pretty specific. My mom didn't tell me about this conversation until I was in my 20s. Last summer, I was helping my parents clean out the attic and found a box of old newspaper clippings about the mine disaster. There were accounts from survivors describing how they heard the men trapped below calling for help for days after the collapse, even though rescue efforts had determined no one could have survived. Some articles mentioned how wives and children of the dead miners reported seeing their loved ones at home, sitting in their favorite chairs or standing at windows weeks after they'd been pronounced dead. One clipping in particular caught my attention. It was a list of the miners who died, and there was a photo of the mine owner's mother, an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway, who apparently died of grief shortly after the accident. The resemblance to the woman I saw at the foot of my bed was uncanny. My parents have researched the history more thoroughly than I have. Apparently, after the collapse, the mining company tried to cover up how dangerous the conditions had been. They'd ignored warnings about structural instability to keep production going. When the collapse happened, they initially reported only 10 deaths, not wanting investors to pull out. The truth only came to light weeks later when the actual death toll couldn't be hidden anymore. I sometimes wonder if what we experience is some kind of, emotional imprint left behind by such a traumatic event. Or maybe it's actually the souls of those miners still lingering around the place where they died. My brother Jake has a different theory. He thinks our house sits on some kind of energy vortex that makes it easier for spirits to manifest. Honestly, I don't know what to believe. What I do know is that just last month, I was staying in my old room while visiting my parents. I woke up around 3:15 in the morning, feeling that same sensation of being watched. I kept my eyes closed, my heart pounding in my chest. The air around me went ice cold, and I could hear what sounded like breathing that wasn't my own. When I finally got the courage to open my eyes, there was nothing visible, but I swear I felt a hand brush against my arm. Not threatening, almost like a reassuring pat. I still can't explain any of it logically. I've tried researching similar experiences, reading about residual hauntings and psychological explanations. Nothing quite fits what my family has experienced for generations in that house. The thing that convinces me this isn't just in our heads is how many unconnected people have had experiences there without knowing its history. My parents talk about selling the house now that they're getting older, but part of me wonders if whatever is there would follow us, or if it's tied to the land itself. Sometimes I think about the families of those miners, never getting proper closure, never knowing exactly what happened to their loved ones down in that dark. Maybe that's why they're still there, still trying to be seen and heard after all these years. Whatever it is, it's been with us my whole life, and sometimes late at night I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that elderly woman watching me from the doorway. Story 19. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap. I'm pretty logical. I work in accounting, for crying out loud. My life revolves around numbers that add up and rules that make sense. At least it did until about 3 months ago, when something happened in my home that I still can't explain. My partner Mark and I have lived in Willow Creek for about 6 years now. It's your typical suburban neighborhood, quiet streets, decent schools, neighbors who mostly keep to themselves except for the occasional block party. We have a 4-year-old daughter, Lily, and 2 cats, Larry, who's a big orange tabby, and Barry, a sleek grey short hair we adopted from the shelter 2 years ago. The first incident happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I had taken a rare day off work to catch up on some stuff around the house while Mark was at work and Lily was at preschool. I was alone except for the cats, folding laundry in the living room with some reality show playing in the background for noise. I was halfway through a mountain of towels when I saw Barry slinking along the wall toward the couch. This wasn't unusual. He loves crawling under there when he wants some alone time. I watched him drop down and slide under the couch, his tail the last thing to disappear beneath the dust ruffle. Not even 10 seconds later, I turned toward the dining room to grab another towel from the basket and froze. Barry was curled up on the dining room table, fast asleep in a patch of sunlight coming through the window. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I had just watched him go under the couch. There's no way he could have gotten from under the couch to the dining table in the span of a few seconds without me noticing. Plus, he was clearly asleep, not the posture of a cat who'd just been moving around. I actually laughed nervously and said out loud, "What the hell?" Then I walked over to the couch, got down on my hands and knees, and lifted the dust ruffle to look underneath. Nothing. No Barry. My first thought was that I'd mistaken Larry for Barry when I saw him go under the couch, but that didn't make sense either. Larry is bright orange and twice Barry's size. There's no confusing them. Plus, when I went to check, Larry was in the kitchen munching from his food bowl. I chalked it up to being tired or my eyes playing tricks on me. Maybe I'd imagined seeing Barry go under the couch. Maybe I was working too hard. I even briefly wondered if someone had slipped something into my coffee that morning, though I knew that was ridiculous. I tried to brush it off, but the image stuck with me all day. I didn't even mention it to Mark when he got home because it sounded so stupid. "Hey honey, I think I saw our cat in 2 places at once today." "Yeah, right. He'd think I was losing it." For a week, everything went back to normal. Both cats acted the same as they always had. Barry was affectionate but independent. Larry was lazy and food-obsessed. Nothing seemed off or strange. Then came the second incident, and this one I can't explain away. It was a Saturday morning. Mark was home. Lily was watching cartoons in the living room, and I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Both cats were in the kitchen with me because, well, food was being prepared. Larry was doing his figure-8 thing around my ankles while Barry sat patiently by his empty food bowl. I remember thinking how hungry they both seemed, so I decided to feed them before finishing our breakfast. I opened a can of wet food, divided it between their 2 bowls, and set them down on their mats. Both cats immediately started eating, Barry making his weird little grunting noises he always makes when he eats, and Larry practically inhaling his portion. That's when I heard Mark call from the living room, "Jordan, did you let Barry out of the kitchen?" I looked down. Barry was still eating, his head buried in his food bowl. "No," I called back. "He's right here eating." There was a pause, and then Mark said, "Well, that's weird, because Lily and I just saw him run across the living room and go under the couch." A chill ran down my spine. I stared at Barry, who was still very much in the kitchen, very much eating his breakfast, completely oblivious to the fact that he had apparently just been seen in another room. "That's impossible," I said, walking into the living room with Barry's food bowl still in my hand. "He's right here." Mark was on his knees looking under the couch. Lily was standing next to him, peering down with curiosity. "I swear I just saw him run in here," Mark said, sounding confused. Lily saw him too. "Grey kitty," Lily confirmed, nodding her head with the absolute certainty only a 4-year-old can muster. "He went under there." She pointed to the couch. Mark stood up, frowning. "There's nothing under there now." I held up Barry's bowl. "And he's been in the kitchen the whole time. Both cats were with me." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "That doesn't make any sense. We both saw a grey cat. It looked exactly like Barry." "Exactly like Barry," Lily echoed, still staring at the couch like she expected him to emerge at any moment. We checked the entire living room, under every piece of furniture, behind the TV stand, in the toy box. No sign of another cat, and the whole time, Barry remained in the kitchen, finishing his breakfast and then grooming himself afterward. That night, after Lily went to bed, Mark and I talked about it. Neither of us could come up with a rational explanation. Could a neighbor's cat have somehow gotten into our house? But we keep our doors and windows closed. And anyway, what are the chances a neighbor would have a cat that looks identical to Barry? Mark suggested maybe we'd seen a shadow or a reflection, but that didn't explain why both he and Lily saw the same thing at the same time, and they were both adamant. It was a gray cat that looked exactly like Barry. Over the next few weeks, I became borderline obsessed with figuring out what happened. I researched everything from optical illusions to paranormal phenomena. I even found some forums where people discussed similar experiences, seeing their pets in 2 places at once, or seeing phantom versions of their animals. Some of the stories gave me goosebumps because they were so similar to what we'd experienced. One person described seeing their black lab in the yard while the dog was actually asleep in the house. Another talked about their cat seemingly walking through a wall and disappearing, only to be found in another room with no possible way of getting there. People suggested everything from quantum physics to glitches in reality to doppelgangers. The doppelganger theory stuck with me. In folklore, seeing a duplicate of yourself or someone you know is often considered an omen of bad luck or even death. But Barry seemed fine. Both cats were healthy, eating well and acting normal. If anything, Barry became more affectionate after these incidents, often sleeping on my pillow at night when he used to prefer the foot of the bed. I started watching him more closely, looking for any signs that something might be off. Was he actually our cat, or had someone replaced him? It sounds crazy, I know, but when you see something impossible happen right in front of you, your mind starts entertaining all sorts of wild theories. Mark thought I was getting too worked up about it. "Maybe we just have a ghost cat," he joked one night. I didn't find it funny. The third incident happened about a month after the second one. This time, I was home alone again. Mark had taken Lily to visit his parents for the weekend, and I was catching up on some work projects. I was sitting at the dining room table with my laptop when I heard a noise from the kitchen, a glass being knocked over. I sighed, assuming one of the cats had jumped onto the counter again. I got up to clean whatever mess they'd made. When I walked into the kitchen, Barry was sitting on the counter next to a tipped-over water glass, looking as guilty as a cat can look. Water was spreading across the countertop and dripping onto the floor. "Barry, you little jerk," I muttered, grabbing a dishcloth to mop up the water. As I cleaned, I heard the distinct sound of cat claws on the hardwood floor behind me, that quick tip-tap of a cat running. I turned, expecting to see Larry, but the doorway was empty. I went back to cleaning up the water, and that's when I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down, and there was Barry, rubbing against my calf like he always does when he wants attention. My blood ran cold. I slowly turned my head back to the counter, already knowing what I'd see but not wanting to believe it. Barry was still sitting there, watching me with his yellow-green eyes. 2 Barrys, one on the counter, one at my feet. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The Barry at my feet meowed softly and head-butted my leg again. The Barry on the counter remained perfectly still, just staring. Then the one on the counter blinked, slowly, deliberately, and jumped down. Instead of landing on the floor, he just vanished, mid-air, gone. The Barry at my feet didn't react at all. He just kept rubbing against me like nothing had happened. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I finally managed to reach down and touch the Barry at my feet. He felt real, solid, warm. He purred when I stroked his back. I called Mark immediately, my voice shaking as I told him what happened. He tried to calm me down, suggested maybe I was more tired than I realized, working too hard, seeing things. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't the first time. Since then, there have been no more incidents, no more duplicate Barrys. Both cats continue to be their normal selves, but I can't shake the feeling that something inexplicable happened in our house. I've installed cameras in the main living areas. Not that I've told Mark, that's why. I said it was for security. So far, they haven't captured anything unusual, but I keep watching, waiting. I don't know what to think anymore. Was it all in my head? But how do you explain 3 separate incidents, 2 of which had multiple witnesses? How do you explain seeing your cat in 2 places at once with your own eyes? I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that, but I can't explain what happened in my home, and that terrifies me more than any supernatural explanation could. Sometimes I catch Barry staring at me in a way that feels different, more intense than a cat should be able to look. And I wonder if he knows something I don't, if he's trying to tell me something, or if whatever I saw, that other Barry is still here, somewhere, watching us, waiting. Story 20. I never believed in ghosts. I used to roll my eyes when my friends would talk about hauntings or supernatural stuff. That was until we moved into the old farmhouse in Willow Creek when I was 16. My parents fell in love with its character and history. If only they knew what kind of history would end up terrorizing me. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. The creaky floors and drafty windows were just part of living in an 1860s house. I loved my upstairs bedroom with its sloped ceiling and window seat overlooking the property. Then, everything changed. It started subtly. I'd be doing homework or texting friends in my room at night, and around 11 o'clock I'd suddenly feel unwelcome. It's hard to describe if you've never felt it. It wasn't just being creeped out. It was this overwhelming sensation that I was intruding in a space that wasn't mine, like someone was standing behind me, silently willing me to leave. At first I brushed it off as being tired or stressed about school, but it happened every single night at the exact same time. I started noticing the pattern when I'd glance at my phone, and it would always be 11 p.m. exactly. The feeling was so consistent that I began leaving my room before 11 just to avoid it. What really freaked me out was when my friend Jenna stayed over. We were hanging out in my room, and I deliberately didn't mention anything about the weird feelings. Around 10:55, I was watching her closely. At exactly 11, she suddenly stood up, looked uncomfortable, and said, "Hey, let's go downstairs and get snacks." When I asked her about it later, she couldn't explain why she suddenly wanted to leave the room. She just felt weird. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. The worst night happened about 6 months after it all started. I had fallen asleep early with my light still on. I woke up suddenly, that horrible feeling of being watched washing over me. When I opened my eyes, there was an elderly woman standing over my bed. I'll never forget her face, deeply wrinkled, with this disturbing smile that didn't reach her eyes. She just stood there staring down at me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear, watching as she slowly faded away until there was nothing left. I refused to sleep in my room for weeks after that. I made up excuses to sleep on the couch downstairs or in the guest room. My parents thought I was being dramatic, but they didn't understand. They couldn't feel what I felt up there. Strangely, after about a month of avoiding my room, the energy just disappeared. One day I cautiously went in during the evening, prepared to run if that feeling returned, but there was nothing, just my normal bedroom. I gradually moved back in, and for about a year and a half, everything seemed fine. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, last month, it started again. That same unwelcome feeling at exactly 11 p.m. I'd be sitting on my bed, and suddenly I'd feel like I was being watched, like something was silently telling me to get out. I started burning sage, something I'd read about online for cleansing negative energy. It seemed to help at first. The feeling would lessen, become more bearable. But a week ago, everything escalated. I was burning sage in my room as 11 approached. The small flame at the end of the bundle suddenly flared up, much bigger than it should have been. Then it moved sideways, literally sideways against my breath before completely extinguishing itself. The sage was still there, but it wouldn't relight no matter how many times I tried. That night was the first time I saw it downstairs. I was in the living room, which had always been my safe place. I was watching TV when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned, I saw what looked like a shadow quickly peeking around the corner from the hallway, then disappearing. Not a normal shadow, a completely black, person-shaped shadow. The next night I was making a sandwich in the kitchen around 10:30. I felt a cold spot behind me, and every hair on my body stood up. I turned around slowly, and there it was again, a dark figure, just at the edge of my vision, watching me from the doorway. When I looked directly at it, it was gone. My dogs have always been my comfort, especially through all this. I have 2 labs, Max and Cooper. They usually sleep in my room, but 3 nights ago, they both started acting strange. Max was the first to notice something. We were all in my room. I'd been trying to tough it out despite the feelings, when he suddenly sat up, ears perked. Cooper followed suit, and then Max started growling, low and threatening, at my bedroom door. I felt my heart pounding as I approached the door. The dogs were right behind me, Max still growling. When I opened it, I saw what looked like a shadow version of a person moving from my kitchen into the living room. Not walking, more like gliding. Both dogs went crazy, barking and running to the top of the stairs but refusing to go down. That was when I knew for certain I wasn't imagining things. My dogs could see it too. Whatever was in the house was real, or at least as real as something like that can be. I've tried to tell my parents, but they don't believe me. My dad says the house is old and makes noises. My mom suggested I might be having anxiety and offered to take me to a therapist. They don't understand that what I'm experiencing isn't in my head. Last night was the worst yet. I was so tired from not sleeping properly that I accidentally dozed off in my room around 10:30. I woke up suddenly, knowing immediately that it was 11. The room felt ice cold, and there was that feeling again, stronger than ever, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I got up to leave, but as I reached for the door handle, I saw a shadow move across the wall, not cast by anything. It was moving independently, like a dark stain spreading across the paint. I ran downstairs, but it wasn't any better there. The shadow figures were everywhere, in corners, behind furniture, just at the edges of my vision, always watching, never showing their faces. They're always behind me, or just disappearing around corners when I turn to look. I can feel their presence, a cold, heavy energy that makes it hard to breathe. I tried sleeping on the couch with the lights on and both dogs beside me. Around 3 in the morning, Max suddenly jumped up and started barking at the hallway. Cooper joined in, hackles raised, both of them focused on something I couldn't see, but I could feel it there, watching us. The most terrifying part is that I don't have anywhere left to hide. The presence is everywhere now, upstairs, downstairs, in every room. Sometimes I feel like it's right behind me, breathing down my neck. When I spin around, there's nothing there, but I know it's just moved to stay behind me. I've tried researching the history of the house, hoping to find some explanation. All I've discovered is that it was built by a farmer named Thomas Brighton in 1864. There are records of his wife dying in the house, but nothing unusual or violent. Nothing that would explain what's happening. I'm writing this now from my car parked in our driveway. I couldn't stay in the house anymore tonight. Earlier, I was in the bathroom when the shower curtain moved. Not like from a draft, but deliberately, like someone was standing behind it. When I yanked it back, there was nothing there. But when I looked in the mirror, I swear I saw a dark figure standing behind me. When I turned around, It was gone. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm 18 now, but I can't afford to move out yet. My parents think I'm being dramatic or making it up for attention. But I know what I'm experiencing is real. The dogs can see it too. The shadow figures are getting bolder. Last night one stayed visible in my peripheral vision for nearly a minute before disappearing. They never show their faces. I only ever see them from behind or the side. Maybe that's a mercy. I don't think I could handle seeing their faces. It's 11 p.m. right now as I sit in my car. I just looked up at my bedroom window, and for a split second, I thought I saw a face looking back at me. Not the elderly woman from before, but something darker, less human. But that's impossible, right? There's no one in my room. Wait. The porch light just went out. I didn't turn it off. And now there's something moving in the shadows by the front door. It looks like it's coming toward the car. The dogs in the back seat are going crazy, barking at something outside the window. I need to start the car. I need to leave. But my hands are shaking so badly I can't get the key in. There's something right outside my window now. I can feel it staring at me, even though I can't see a face. Just darkness, shaped like a person, watching. Oh God, the car door just locked itself. I didn't touch it. The dogs have gone silent. Why have they stopped barking? The shadow is pressing against the window now. It's 11:01. Story 21. I never believed in ghosts until I moved into that duplex in Hempstead. It was a beautiful old Victorian, over 100 years old, with all these gorgeous details like hand-carved wood molding around the doorways and original hardwood floors that creaked in that cozy old house way. The rent was surprisingly affordable considering how beautiful it was, and I was thrilled when the landlord approved my application for the lower unit. My roommate Josh and I moved in during summer 3 years ago. The place was perfect, except for these dark stains on the living room and dining room floors. When I asked the landlord about them, he just shrugged and said, "Old houses, you know." I didn't think much of it at the time, figured maybe someone had spilled wine decades ago or something. The layout was pretty simple. You walked in through the front door into a small entryway, then into the living room which connected to the dining room, and that led to the kitchen. There was an addition at the back of the house that wasn't original. It contained my bedroom, Josh's bedroom, and a bathroom. The addition was maybe 30 or 40 years old, so the floors back there were newer. Everything was normal for the first few weeks. Josh worked nights at a bar downtown, so I was often alone in the evenings. I'd cook dinner, watch Netflix, normal stuff. It wasn't until about a month in that I started feeling watched. It happened in the kitchen first. I was washing dishes, and I suddenly got this prickly feeling on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? That's exactly what it was. I turned around, expecting to see Josh, but there was nobody there. Just the empty doorway leading to the dining room. The feeling didn't go away though. My eyes kept getting drawn to a specific spot in that doorway, right above the dark stain on the dining room floor. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, watching me. This continued for a few days. I'd feel watched in the kitchen, always from that same spot. I started avoiding the kitchen after dark, which was ridiculous. I was a grown woman afraid of my own kitchen. I've always been interested in paranormal stuff, so I did some research online. A lot of sites suggested acknowledging the presence and setting boundaries. So one night, feeling completely stupid, I stood in the kitchen and said out loud, "I know you're there. That's fine. But I live here now. I pay rent. We need to respect each other's space." Looking back, that was probably a mistake. The next day, the feeling of being watched was everywhere. Not just the kitchen, but the living room, the hallway, even the bathroom. And it felt different. Before, it was just a presence. Now it felt like someone was actively looking at me, like they were peeking around corners or standing just behind me. I started noticing other things too. I'd put something down and later find it in a slightly different position. Not moved across the room or anything dramatic. Just shifted, like someone had picked it up and put it back down. Not quite right. Josh didn't notice anything at first. He'd come home at 3 or 4 in the morning, sleep until noon, and then head out again. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I kept it to myself. Then fall came, and we turned on the central heating for the first time. I had these Christmas lights strung up around my bedroom window. I like the soft light they give off. And I noticed they were gently swaying. At first, I thought it was just the air from the heating vent, but my vent was closed, and we didn't have air conditioning. Those lights shouldn't have been moving at all. I mentioned it to Josh, who just laughed and said the house was old and probably drafty. He wasn't wrong, but these weren't gentle drafts. The lights would sway rhythmically, like someone was blowing on them or touching them. Things escalated from there. My friend Alyssa came over one evening, and we were hanging out in the living room. I had a hula hoop hanging on the wall. I was into hooping at the time, and right in the middle of our conversation, it jumped off the wall. Not fell, jumped, like someone had grabbed it and yanked it down. Alyssa saw it too, and we both just sat there staring at the hoop on the floor. "What the fuck was that?" she whispered. I couldn't even answer. I was too freaked out. A week later, I was alone in the house. It was around 10 at night, and I was in the living room reading. There was this old light fixture in the center of the ceiling. Nothing fancy, just a glass dome covering the bulb. I heard a crack, looked up, and watched as the glass dome detached from the ceiling, fell, and shattered on the floor. There was no reason for it to fall. No earthquake, no slam of a door, nothing. I called the landlord the next day, but he didn't seem concerned. Those old fixtures, the screws get loose. I'll send someone to replace it next week. But I knew it wasn't loose screws. Something had pulled it down. The Christmas lights incident was what really got to me, though. I was in my bedroom getting ready for bed. The lights were gently swaying as they had been for weeks, and I was trying to ignore it. Then, all at once, they lifted off the wall. The whole string just rose up, like someone had grabbed them in the middle and was holding them about 6 inches off the wall. They hung there for maybe 3 seconds, then dropped back against the wall. I ran out of my room so fast I nearly tripped. I spent the night on the couch with all the lights on. After that, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, jumping at every noise and movement. I went back to those paranormal websites and started reading more seriously. One thing that kept coming up was the idea that sometimes you can sense information about a spirit if you're open to it. So the next evening I sat in the living room, closed my eyes, and tried to, receive. It sounds so stupid saying it now, but I was desperate. And I got something, a flash of an image. A young girl, maybe 14 years old, with curly blonde hair. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned sailor outfit, the kind children wore in the early 1900s. And she was afraid, so afraid. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. I felt certain that's who was in the house with me, a young girl who had died here, who was still here, who was afraid. But after the Christmas lights incident, I was afraid too. I didn't want her in my room anymore. The website suggested using salt as protection, so I poured a line of salt across my bedroom doorway and said out loud, "You are not welcome in my room. This is my space. Stay out." To my shock, it worked. The activity in my bedroom stopped completely. The Christmas lights hung still. Nothing moved or shifted, but the rest of the house, that was still her territory apparently. Josh finally started noticing things too. He'd come home late and find all the cabinet doors in the kitchen open. He'd wake up to sounds of footsteps in the hallway when I wasn't home. Once, he swore he saw a shadow move across the wall that couldn't have been cast by anything in the room. "I think the house is haunted," he said one morning, looking exhausted. "You think?" I replied. We started talking about moving out, but our lease had another 6 months and neither of us could afford to break it and lose our security deposit. It was around this time that Maggie, who had lived in the unit before us, stopped by to pick up some mail that had been delivered to our place by mistake. We got to talking, and I cautiously brought up the weird experiences we'd been having. "Oh yeah," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "That's just the house. Didn't the landlord tell you?" "Tell us what?" "About the fire. It happened like 100 years ago. That's what those stains on the floor are. They're burn marks." My blood went cold. Burn marks? From what? Maggie shrugged. The story I heard was that a family lived here, and there was a fire in the middle of the night. Not everyone made it out. I thought about those dark stains on the floor. I'd been walking over them every day. What if they weren't just burned wood? What if they were... I couldn't even finish the thought. That night, I sat in the living room and looked at those stains with new eyes. The largest one was in the dining room, right below where I always felt watched from. If there had been a fire, and if someone had died, had they died right there? Was that why the presence was strongest in that spot? I thought about the girl I had sensed. Young, blonde, afraid. Had she died in that fire? Had she been trapped, terrified, unable to escape? Was that why she was still here, a century later, moving my things and swinging my Christmas lights? The activity continued for the rest of our lease. Doors would open and close, things would move. The feeling of being watched never went away. But after I'd set the boundary with my bedroom, it felt less threatening somehow, like we'd come to an understanding. When our lease was up, we moved out. I've never gone back to that house, not even to drive by it. I don't want to know if those stains are still there, if new tenants are feeling watched in the kitchen, if Christmas lights are swaying when they shouldn't be. I still think about her sometimes, that blonde girl in the sailor outfit. I wonder if she's still there, if she'll always be there, tied to the spot where she died too young, too afraid, too suddenly. I wonder if anyone has ever tried to help her move on, or if everyone just does what I did, sets boundaries, lives with it until their lease is up, and then leaves her behind. I don't know what happened in that Victorian duplex all those years ago. I don't know who died, or how exactly. All I know is that someone is still there. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep at night, I swear I can feel someone watching me from the corner of my room, just for a moment, before I remember that I'm not in that house anymore. But the fear, that's still with me. Because now I know that the things we tell ourselves aren't real. Ghosts, spirits, presences, they're real enough, and they can reach out and touch your world if they want to. Story 22. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. For 16 years, I rolled my eyes at horror movies and laughed at my friends who swore they felt presences in old buildings. I was the rational one, the skeptic who needed proof. Well, I got my proof last winter, and now I can't sleep with the lights off anymore. It happened when I was visiting my friend Jacob in Selfoss, Iceland. It's this small historic town where everybody knows everybody, and most of the houses have been around for generations. Jacob's family had just moved into this old two-story house that had been vacant for a while. It was nothing special from the outside, just weathered wood siding with chipped blue paint and these really old-fashioned windows. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Jacob had invited our whole friend group over. There were 8 of us total. We were just normal teenagers hanging out, playing video games in the dining room where Jacob had set up his console. The house had this weird layout where you had to walk through the living room to get to the bathroom, and the dining room was connected to the kitchen with this old archway. Everything was fine for the first few hours. We were just messing around, eating chips, drinking soda, the usual stuff. Around 9 in the evening, my phone started blowing up with texts from my mom asking when I'd be home. I didn't want to be rude and text at the table, so I walked into the living room to reply. The living room was freezing compared to the dining room where we'd all been. I remember thinking it was weird because the heating was on in the rest of the house. There was just this old couch, a couple of armchairs that looked like they belonged to someone's grandma, and these faded family photos on the wall that weren't even Jakob's family. I was standing by the window, typing on my phone, when I felt it, this light breeze on the back of my neck. At first, I thought it was just a draft from one of the old windows, but then the breeze turned into this bone-deep chill that spread across my entire body. That's when I heard it, right in my ear, so close I could feel the breath. An elderly woman's voice, raspy and thin, whispering "hello" in Icelandic. I froze. The voice was so clear, so real. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nobody. The room was completely empty. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat breaking out on my forehead despite how cold the room was. Just then, Emil, one of my friends, walked in. He must have seen the look on my face because he immediately asked if I was okay. I asked him if he had been whispering through the door or playing a prank on me. He looked at me like I was crazy and swore he hadn't. We walked back to the dining room, and I was trying to shake it off. Maybe I imagined it, right? Maybe it was the wind or something, but I couldn't stop thinking about how real that voice sounded, how I could feel the breath on my ear. "Guys," I said, trying to sound casual as we sat back down with the others. "I think I might be going crazy or something. I swear I just heard an old woman say hello to me in the living room." I expected everyone to laugh, but instead Jakob's mom, who was walking through the dining room with a basket of laundry, stopped and looked at me with this weird expression. "No, you're not crazy," she said, way too casually for what she was about to tell me. "That's normal here. 4 people died in this house. An old woman and 3 men who died by suicide." The room went completely silent. I remember looking around at my friends' faces and seeing the same shock I was feeling. Who says something like that so casually? And who moves into a house where 4 people died? "You're joking, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh. She shook her head. "The real estate agent told us before we bought the place. The old woman died in her sleep upstairs. The others..." She trailed off, shrugging like she was talking about the weather instead of multiple suicides. As she finished speaking, I felt something pull at the back of my hoodie. At first I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, but when I turned around, no one was there. The tugging got stronger, like someone was trying to get my attention. "Guys, very funny," I said, reaching behind me to grab whatever was pulling on my clothes. But there was nothing there, just air. "Marcus, your hoodie." Jakob pointed, his eyes wide. I looked down and saw my hoodie moving. Not like it was caught in a breeze, but like someone was literally pinching the fabric between their fingers and tugging it. Everyone saw it. All 7 of my friends were staring at my back, watching my hoodie being manipulated by something none of us could see. I panicked. I started grabbing at my clothes, trying to make it stop. I was yelling, "What the hell? What the hell?" over and over. I've never been so terrified in my life. I tore my hoodie off and threw it on the floor, backing away from it like it was poisonous. Then, while we were all staring at my hoodie on the floor, we heard it, heavy footsteps coming up the stairs from the first floor. Not like someone sneaking around, but loud, deliberate steps. They sounded like work boots, the kind with thick soles that make that distinctive thud on wooden floors. Thud, 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 slow and steady, all the way up the stairs. We all froze. There were 8 of us in that room. Me, Jakob, Emil, and 5 other friends, all accounted for. Jakob's mom had gone back to the laundry room. His dad was working the night shift. There shouldn't have been anyone else in the house. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and then we heard a door slam so hard the whole house seemed to shake. All of us jumped. "What the hell was that?" Emil whispered, his voice cracking. Nobody answered. We were all too scared to move. Finally, Jakob stood up. "We should check it out," he said, but I could tell he was terrified. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "Didn't you hear what your mom said? 4 people died here." "Exactly," he replied. "If we're going to stay in this house, we need to know what we're dealing with." So, like the stupid teenagers in every horror movie, we all went upstairs together. Nobody wanted to be left alone downstairs. The staircase was narrow and creaked with every step. It felt like it took forever to reach the top. The upstairs hallway had 4 doors, 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom. All the doors were closed. We stood there, huddled together, trying to decide which door had slammed. "It was that one," Jakob said, pointing to the door at the end of the hall, what was now his parents' bedroom. We approached the door slowly. Jakob put his hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was empty, completely empty. The bed was neatly made, the curtains were drawn, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. We checked the other rooms too, all empty. We even looked in the closets and under the beds. "Maybe it was just the wind," someone suggested, but we all knew it wasn't. There was no wind that could make footsteps like that or slam a door with such force. When we went back downstairs, Jacob's mom was in the kitchen making tea. She seemed completely unfazed by the noise. "Did you hear that door slam upstairs?" I asked her. She nodded, stirring honey into her tea. "They get active at night, especially the men. The old woman is usually quiet unless she wants to talk to someone." "Has she talked to you?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. She took a sip of her tea before answering. "Once. I was awake around 1 or 2 in the morning, reading in bed. My door swung open, and I heard footsteps coming toward me, but I couldn't see anyone. Then she whispered in my ear, telling me to go to sleep. The door closed by itself, and my light turned off. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. None of us knew what to say. Jacob had never mentioned his house was haunted. Maybe he didn't know either, based on the shocked look on his face. After that, nobody wanted to stay. We all made excuses about needing to get home early. I didn't even want to put my hoodie back on, but it was freezing outside, so I had no choice. As I was leaving, Jacob's mom caught my arm. "The old woman doesn't mean any harm," she said quietly. "She's just lonely. The men, though, be careful around them. They're angry." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that raspy hello in my ear. I kept feeling phantom tugs on my clothes. I threw that hoodie away as soon as I got home. The next day at school, we all tried to pretend it didn't happen, but during lunch, Emil brought it up. "We all saw it, right?" he asked, looking around the table. "Marcus's hoodie moving by itself." Everyone nodded. "And the footsteps? The door slamming?" he continued. More nods. "So we're all in agreement that Jacob's house is haunted as hell and we're never going back there?" That got a few nervous laughs, but no one disagreed. I haven't been back to Jacob's house since that day. He doesn't invite people over anymore. Sometimes at school, I catch him looking tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and I wonder if he's been kept awake by footsteps and slamming doors. As for me, I've become the opposite of who I was. I used to be the skeptic, the one who needed proof. Now I'm the one who gets nervous in old buildings, who feels watched in empty rooms. I sleep with the lights on and can't stand to be alone in my house, because once you've felt a ghost tug on your clothes, once you've heard a dead woman whisper in your ear, you can't go back to not believing. And the worst part? 7 other people experienced it with me. 7 witnesses who can confirm that what happened in that house in Selfus wasn't my imagination. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that day. I probably never will, but I know what I felt, what I heard, and what I saw. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can't shake the feeling that the old woman followed me home.